Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
Dashing for those apartment and glancing at the clock, Kathy headed straight for the bedroom, quickly pulling off her clothes and throwing them on as she went. She only had half an hour at her disposal. She mustn't be late for her date with Robert at one of Washington's finest restaurants. Therefore, it was worth hurrying. Robert was not just a man, but a gorgeous man. Robert, despite his very young age, he managed to establish himself as an outstanding director. And to top it all off, he was incredibly handsome. And his voice is low, commanding, from which all the female representatives on the set of Goosebumps ran along the skin. To say that Kathy was surprised when he offered to have dinner together, that's not to say anything. There were many actresses on the set flirting with him. And in Kathy's opinion, they were more beautiful. But his choice fell on her, to which the woman was unspeakably glad. The evening passed simply magically. Robert turned out to be a very well-read and interesting conversationalist, as Kathy herself. The time spent in his company flew by in a flash. And as it turned out, they had a lot in common. So they could talk for hours on a variety of subjects. Kathy had never been so at ease with a man. The woman did not class herself as a beauty, but apparently the men had their own opinion on this matter, because she had enough admirers. With one of them, she even lived in a civil marriage for about 3 years. But over time began mutual reproaches and scandals, and parting brought only relief, which in principle was to be expected. After all, Kathy was initially clear that they are not a couple. But for some reason she decided, as they say in the People, bitch and love. But he didn't, and he wasn't with his beloved. Then there were fleeting romances, but nothing serious with none of her men. She would not want to create a family, despite the fact that recently turned 35. Deep down, like any woman, she wanted a family and children and the comforts of home badly. So when Robert started paying her attention, she shied away from him like the devil from an incense tree. She immediately decided that he was too good for a woman like her. And of course, he just wanted to have fun with her. Nothing serious could be expected. But the man was persistent. And soon she gave in and agreed to a date. After the first, there was a second, then a third, and Kathy's head was blown off. From now on, all her thoughts were occupied only with Robert. And so when she was once again going to meet her beloved, she suddenly had an unexpected thought. She sat down on the edge of the bed and began to think out loud. Well, if you think about it that way, we've been dating for a little over a month now. And I'm always thinking about him. But nothing's happened between us yet. Maybe I should invite him over. But if we're being honest with ourselves, I've wanted to for a long time. I hope he won't think badly of me. And on the other hand, be as it will be necessary to live today. The woman instantly grabbed her cell phone, knowing that at any minute she could change her mind and the whole plan would go to hell, and dialed Robert. By the sound of the voice she heard, she realized that the offer pleased him, and he promised to be at her place in about 40 minutes. Stepping over the threshold of her apartment, Robert couldn't contain his admiration. A 2-bedroom apartment in downtown Washington. It's not too cramped for you alone. The man laughed, at his own joke. No, I'm used to it. The woman shrugged with a smile. Are you taking it off? No, it's mine. I didn't expect it, Robert said. Turns out you're a very eligible bride. Well, it's just that I've been trying to keep a low profile for a while now, Kathy explained. You see, at my last job, I decided to throw a party and invited my coworkers over. After that, I had a few too many suitors. And the interesting thing is, they were mostly from out of town. You know what I mean? I think I do. Well, don't worry about me. I've got a place to live, but I don't have a woman like you. With those words, the man pulled Kathy to him and kissed her. You know, Robert stayed until morning, and they went to the movie studio together. And it was just this moment that the woman was not very happy until today. She tried to hide their relationship. And as it turned out, not in vain. When their affair became known, Aunt Kathy sprinkled slanted glances, and the leading actress began to build the deceased all sorts of intrigues. But this Kathy only amused. She was afraid of something else. Separation, because sooner or later she bored Robert, and he will part with her. Of that she had no doubt. It was only a matter of time. Well, what could she possibly tie a man like him to her? What had she done to deserve him? Nothing. Kathy, of course, had not told Robert that the apartment in the center was not all her wealth. Besides, she had a bank account and stocks, from which she had a decent income that allowed her not to work. But the woman did not want to sit at home. She owed it all to her father. 10 years ago, when after a long illness, her mother died, her father was not long left without the comfort of a widower and married a young girl. With this girl, he went abroad for permanent residence, and Kathy left the apartment and money, as if wishing to pay off his daughter, who accidentally found out that his girl was the mistress of her father while her mother was still alive. Since then, he had literally cut Kathy out of his life and called her only a couple times for her birthday and Christmas. Kathy took no offense, except that for some reason her father's calls made her feel even more lonely. But when she started dating Robert, her life took on new colors. Men more and more often stayed overnight at her place, and in the mornings they went to work together. So his things appeared in Kathy's apartment, first a razor and a toothbrush, and one morning Robert offered, "Kathy, how would you feel about me moving in with you?" The woman was confused. She hadn't expected such a question and wasn't at all prepared for it. "I mean, do you want us to live together?" "Well, yeah, I was just thinking, I spend every night with you. So what's the point of going back and forth? We're adults. Let's give it a shot. What's stopping us? I'm not talking about marriage yet, because it's too big a step for me. For now, I feel very comfortable with you, as if we were two halves of the same whole. And then we need to check how we live with ourselves, if our life will not spoil our relationship." "On what?" "How do you feel about living together?" Holding a cup of flavored coffee in one hand, with the other he pulled Kathy to him. She, not believing her happiness, nodded her head in agreement. "Yes, of course, I agree. Move in with me even today." A year later, Robert proposed to her. For the woman, it was not a surprise. In a year of living together, she could believe that they could have a family. Robert turned out to be quite a domestic man. In the evenings, he liked to read books with Kathy. Their tastes in literature coincided, and after reading they vigorously discussed the heroes' plots. They also liked to go to the theater, to the movies, and in general, they were interesting together. But before making a proposal to the beloved, something happened that put Kathy in a deadlock. Robert challenged her to a frank conversation, and it concerned the children. "Kathy, I can see how you're fascinated by little children. And I suppose, like any woman, you want to have your own. But I want to warn you right off the bat. I'd like to state my position on fatherhood, so to speak. I never want children. Not at all. Do you understand me? If you're with me, we won't have children." Robert said what he said, and Kathy sat there like a thunderbolt. "Meaning? Are you seriously saying that now? If I understand correctly, our relationship is so meaningless to you that you don't plan to have children with me. That's where you're wrong. Everything that's going on between us is very serious to me, and I plan to start a family with you. And if at first I thought I just liked you, now I can safely say I love you, Kathy. I want to be with you forever, but I don't want to cheat on you. I'm never going to have kids ever. You either have to accept that and walk through life with me, or you don't. Decide." The woman was silent, fighting back the incoming tears. It can't be like this. It's too hard a choice. Breaking up with Robert was something she couldn't do. He was the meaning of her life, but she didn't want to live without her children either. And the worst part was that Kathy was already pregnant. Robert just didn't know it yet. And how to tell him now, she had no idea. She wanted to have a child with this man, the man she loved. Kathy began to dream of holding her baby in her arms. But at that moment, she had no idea how adamant Robert was about children. And now she was frightened. Robert. Her consternation was mistaken for reflection on what she had heard, and grabbing her arm, began to coax her. "Kathy, well, think for yourself. Are we bored, the two of us? We're free. We can travel, and no one and nothing binds us hand and foot. You loved Paris so much. If we'd had a child, would we have traveled there? No, of course not. I've never understood why family life has to be about children. A family is two people who want to be together. and it doesn't necessarily have to be cemented by children. But do you really want to be washing diapers and staying up all night? A stunned Kathy remained silent, and Robert decided she agreed with him. Tema kicked him in the cheek and went into the kitchen to make dinner. The man loved to cook, and his meals were always exquisite. A couple weeks after this conversation, Robert proposed to Kathy, and she accepted. Accordingly, he was sure she had accepted all his terms. Kathy's heart was torn to pieces. Of course, the gestational age was small, and an abortion could have been done. But she didn't even think about that option. She was already 35, and she was getting rid of the baby now. What then to wait for Robert to change their views on life? And if he didn't? Signed, Robert and Kathy modestly, without too much fuss. After the wedding, however, sat in a restaurant, inviting only about 10 common friends. The guests happily congratulated the newlyweds, noticing that the bride was too thoughtful and not very cheerful. And only one of the guests knew the real reason for this mood, Kathy Nina, a close friend of the bride. The girls had been friends since high school. And even when Nina left D.C., they stayed in touch. They called each other from time to time. And recently, after another divorce, Nina came back to live back in Washington. Kathy decided to share her little secret with the book. And their last candid conversation was just before the wedding. The friend said, "If you want my opinion, it's not fair to your fiancé. He should know about your situation before you get married. And frankly, I don't understand what you're trying to accomplish. From my point of view, it's easier for him to accept the fact that you're pregnant now. But when you live together for a while and he suddenly notices your rounded belly and he can't help but notice it, that's when it'll look like you married him. By deception. But it's basically true. He was honest with you, and he dotted all the I's and T's before the wedding. What you're doing, Kathy, is despicable." The bride almost cried. "You don't understand. If I tell him, he'll just leave me, and after the wedding he won't. Are you sure about that? Then it'll only get worse. Then we'll be husband and wife, and I want to believe that he'll get over it. You're stupid, Kathy, and your plan is stupid. Look at your Robert. He's a gorgeous man. You can only dream about him. From the looks of it, he loves you. You spend all your free time together. What are you missing? Maybe you should consider an abortion before it's too late. We'll do it quietly, no dust. I'll help you. Robert won't find out. And then you can marry him with peace of mind. I don't have children either, though I've been married. In more ways than one. So, nothing. They're not really the end of the world." "No," Kathy exclaimed at the time. "We're not even talking about turnover. This baby is mine. I need him." Kathy pressed her hands to her still flat belly and stroked it, as if to soothe the budding there. Life comforting, letting her know that this new life was very important to her. Not much had changed in Kathy and Robert's lives since the signing, except for the wedding rings appearing on their fingers and a stamp in their papers. Otherwise, everything was the same. The newlyweds were always together. Robert began to plan a new trip. This time he wanted to visit Italy with his wife and was actively discussing it with Kathy, who was increasingly silent. She knew that this trip was unlikely to happen by the time Robert planned it. Kathy's belly would already be visible, and it would be impossible to hide the obvious. Kathy pulled away as best she could on purpose with her underwear. Robert noticed that she had put on weight and was immensely proud of himself, as he believed that this was due to his own culinary skills. The man could not even guess that the reason for his wife's fullness was far from his tasty, leathery ones. And Kathy continued to be silent. What was she waiting for? Yes, she herself did not know what she wanted to prolong the moments of happiness in married life. And of course, in the back of her mind lived the hope that her husband would accept her pregnancy, when it was too late to change anything. One thing she hadn't considered. If at home she could hide the morning cab of a goat, then at the film studio immediately noticed that the woman began to react strongly to odors and often went to the bathroom. Women in such cases cannot be fooled. And then one day the unexpected happened. One of the female employees decided to congratulate Robert on his impending fatherhood. The man laughed and assured his colleague that she was mistaken, but a grain of doubt in his soul. He began to reflect and came to the conclusion that his wife behaves lately quite strange, and she had put on weight. No, it can't be, he said to himself. Kathy would never do that to him. He had told her everything, and she had agreed with his position and accepted his proposal. Even so, that same evening, while in the kitchen with his wife and arranging another of his culinary creations on plates, Robert said with a slight chuckle, "You're not going to believe this, Kathy. I was congratulated today on my impending fatherhood." The fork yanked loudly against the plate fell out of the woman's hand, and seeing her tense up, her spouse froze in place. "Kathy, maybe you can answer me too. You heard what I just told you." The woman continued to remain silent, her head low over the kitchen table. Then Robert, turning the pan of food on the stove. With one jerk, he moved a chair and sat down across from his wife. "Look me in the eye, Kathy. Tell me it's a misunderstanding. I beg you, you couldn't be so mean as to deceive me." "Yes, I could. Can you believe I'm so mean?" Kathy mumbled, but she never looked up. Robert turned pale, his mind reeling from what he had heard. And when he found out she was 4 months pregnant, he couldn't bear it. "I mean, 4 months. So when we got married, you were already pregnant, and of course, you couldn't have known about it. Why? Tell me, why did you do this to me?" And then Kathy became hysterical. She looked her spouse straight in the eyes and screamed, shook with sobs. "Why? Why is it always like this with you? You're only thinking about yourself, and I'm thinking about me. I want this baby more than anything in the world. I wanted it from you because I love you. Yeah, I didn't tell you the truth. You can take that as a lie, a betrayal, a meanness. But I don't see how having a baby could hurt us. Well, we won't be able to travel for a while until Mom's a little older. So what? I'm already 35. Robert, don't you see, I'm ripe to be a mother. It's such a blessing to give birth to someone you love." Kathy tried to take the man's hand, but he pulled her back sharply and asked in a cruel voice she had never heard before, "But you could have terminated the pregnancy. That was an option you hadn't considered." Kathy, already unable to say anything, just shook his head negatively, and Robert continued, "You and I have been together a long time. Kathy, I've never told you about my past. There are some things that are unbearable to remember and even harder to tell. You know I've been married. You asked me the reason for my divorce, and I said the first thing that came to mind. We didn't see eye to eye. I lied then. We divorced when we couldn't keep our daughter safe." Kathy gave her husband a surprised look. Yeah, you heard me. I was a father once before. My little girl was 4 years old at the time. She got sick. Acute pneumonia killed her in a couple days. It was misdiagnosed at first, and that's what made the difference. And when they realized it, it was too late. Do you have any idea how painful that is? Watching your child die and there's nothing you can do to help. I wanted to go to sleep with her forever. My wife and I couldn't go on living together, couldn't see each other. It was then that I came to the conclusion that I would never be a father again. The world around us is already full of suffering, and we have no right to condemn innocent babies to it. And I want to remind you of my decision. I gave you advance notice before the wedding. I was honest, and you did. So I don't want to see you anymore, Kathy, and I've gone to bed." Robert retired to his bedroom, slammed the door loudly behind him, and because as he did so, Kathy realized she didn't belong there. The woman is right. Worn in the next room on the couch. All night early in the morning, she heard her husband packing his things. Kathy pretended to sleep, as Robert wandered around the rooms putting his suitcase away. When he went into the hallway, she got up and walked out as if drunk. To him, she froze in the doorway, nuzzling her black pigtail with her head. "Leaving?" In a faint voice, she asked. "Yes, I'm leaving. What did you expect? I did a lot of thinking last night, and I've come to the conclusion that you shouldn't blame yourself for anything. You're a woman, and every woman wants to be a mother. But you've made your choice. I don't want this baby. And to be perfectly honest, I don't even want to see you with a belly. I don't like you being pregnant. I'm not planning on divorcing you just yet. And yes, you can put me down as the father. I'll help you with money too, but that's all you can count on." Saying all this, the husband did not look at Kathy, and then tried to leave the apartment as quickly as possible. It was difficult for him to do so, because in addition to the bulky suitcase, there were 3 huge bags of his belongings. Trying to take it all in one go, never to come back, Kathy thought and grinned bitterly. When she arrived at work, Robert was not at the movie studio. He didn't show up for the next few days either, and after about a week, the rumors started that Robert wouldn't be here again. Colleagues squinted at Kathy, some with pity and some with poorly concealed gloating. What did she want? They whispered in the corners that he would be with her all her life. It's a wonder they ever got married. Now they'd have to get a divorce. But in principle, it was clear to everyone how the show would end. And then Nina came to visit, and she wasn't planning on feeling sorry for Kathy either. What did you want? Girlfriend? You know better than that. I warned you. Remember, you could have terminated the pregnancy, and none of this would be happening now. And now you've lost such a man. Nina could have gone on for a long time. But noticing Kathy's faded look, she realized that she was only hurting her. Then she put her arm around her friend's shoulders and led her to the kitchen. Come on, girl, let's have some tea. We can't have anything stronger now, but it's not worth it. You wanted a child and you have one. Financially, you're quite confident you can provide for your baby all by yourself. And men are men. They come and go. Now you need to pull yourself together and not be nervous and eat well. Time flew by very quickly. Kathy paused from foot to foot and reached the kitchen. She was just a little bit away from giving birth, and her belly was huge, so she couldn't move around like she used to. But in spite of this, now she was singing her songs as she promised to come to her. Kathy was unspeakably glad because on maternity leave she lacked communication. Sitting all day alone in a huge apartment was hard. When she heard the doorbell, she hurried to the door and swung it open. The woman's face changed. Robert was looking at her instead of her friend. They hadn't seen each other since he packed his things and left the apartment in a hurry. The man hadn't shown up at the movie studio all this time. Apparently, not wanting to meet with his wife, not once called her. Just disappeared from her life, and all reminder of him remained only the ring on Kathy's finger. And the constant longing. A lot of thoughts ran through the woman's head as she watched the present in the hallway of her spouse. And then there was a sudden hope. What if he changed his mind? What if he had come to stay? But it also immediately disappeared when Robert, without asking permission, stepped into the hallway and handed Kathy the keys to the apartment. I forgot to give them to you. I brought them myself to open them, and I didn't dare go in. Robert, seeing that his wife was in no hurry to take them, put the bunch on the nightstand in the hallway. And Kathy, whose mouth was suddenly dry, asked, You came, but you didn't have to worry about that. No, I just wanted to say goodbye. I'm leaving. Speaking with Kathy. Robert only looked at her face, carefully avoiding looking at her huge belly, tightly encased in a homemade robe. Kathy didn't really want to know the details, but Robert remained silent and waited for her to inquire about the details. So the woman squeezed out a question asking if you were going away for a long time. I hope forever. I have a friend in Germany invited me to work there. Not exactly on my profile, of course, but it is not terrible. I hope I can prove myself and do better. The woman's heart leaped out of her chest. There he stood before her. Such a beloved and dear man, and at the same time, such an alien, aloof man, averting his eyes. Why had he come at all? What would this goodbye text be for? It would have been easier to talk to him that way, much less see him. It was just unbearable. Suddenly, the room swam in Kathy's eyes, spinning on its axis, and at the same time, something very hot flowed down her legs. Lowering her eyes and struggling to focus her gaze, Kathy saw the red dribbles of her ankles. Jesus, that's blood. She managed to think. The woman before she passed out. I lost Robert, and now I'm losing the baby. This is my punishment for my lies. Robert, seeing her stagger and start to fall, managed to pick his wife up, preventing her from hitting the floor. And then I heard a scream behind me, What you did to her, you scoundrel. What happened? It was Nina, who Kathy was waiting for. She walked through the open door of the apartment and saw a frightening scene. Robert crouched on his knees, holding his bleeding, unconscious wife in his arms. I didn't do anything, he bellowed. Call an ambulance as soon as possible. The man did not wait for the doctor to come up to the apartment. He took his wife outside to wait for the ambulance near the entrance. After a while, Nina and Robert wandered around the hospital corridor waiting. They were informed that labor had begun, but was proceeding with complications. After a few hours, the doctor came out to them and addressed Robert, since he was officially the husband of the woman in labor. "Your wife can't discharge. We are deciding now, but she will probably have to have a C-section as well. I have to ask you, whose life is the priority, mom or the baby? You may have to make that difficult choice." "The mom, of course, the mom." Without thinking for a second, Robert exclaimed, "Say, Kathy, there's no choice here." Nina stood silently at a distance. She didn't know what to say. Of one thing, she was sure Kathy would not approve of this choice. If she herself were asked now, she would say with certainty that it was the child who should be saved, not her. And on the other hand, if Kathy didn't, who would raise her baby? Robert would clearly not be needed. Children's homes. From heavy thoughts, Nina clutched her head, and the doctor, having heard Robert's answer, withdrew with a quick step. And once again, the dreadful wait dragged on. Kathy's labor lasted almost 24 hours. Nina couldn't stay in the hospital the whole time. She ran in and out again. Robert, on the other hand, didn't leave for a minute. He didn't even seem to sit down once. His expression was grim, and he hadn't eaten or drunk in 24 hours. Looking at his haggard look, Nina realized how much he loved Kathy. Once again, the doctor came out to them. The robot looked at him fearfully, but the doctor was exhausted, and a satisfied smile played on his lips. "Thank goodness, Mom, and the baby are fine. You have a boy, son." But Robert let the doctor's last words pass his ears. After the anxiety he had suffered, he could not relax and realize that the danger was over. "Answer me, what's wrong with her? I'm telling you, your wife and child are alive. Their lives are no longer in danger. Daddy, you can breathe." The doctor came over and patted Robert on the shoulder, and he suddenly scampered away, leaning against the wall and covering his face with his hands. After the doctor left, Robert turned to the book. "I have to go. Tell Kathy that even though I will be living in Germany every month, she will receive a transfer from me." "What do you mean you have to go?" exclaimed the dumbfounded Nina. "Are you not even going to visit your wife?" "No, I don't see the point in that," Robert muttered his head. "We've both seen what meeting me leads to. I don't want Kathy to be unnecessarily nervous. Nothing has changed for me. I'm leaving. And don't tell her I've been here the whole time. Just tell her about the money." Robert, as if afraid to change his mind, ran down the corridor, and a confused Nina looked after him. How could it be? What is wrong with this man? He loves Kathy so much, but now he's running away. For what? Because of his principles. Stupid. How stupid. These men are strange after all. They are very difficult to understand. Nina shrugged her shoulders in bewilderment and hurried to her friend, whom the doctor had allowed to visit in the ward. Kathy watched with a smile as Thomas walked down the street. He had only recently started walking, and his movements were still rather tentative, but he was trying. Kathy longed for her husband. As she rejoiced at her son's progress, she thought how much she would like Robert to see Thomas grow and rejoice with her. Her husband kept his word and sent money every month. At first he even called, but the woman found it hard to talk, and she minimized communication only by correspondence. So, thinking about her husband, Kathy walked with her son along the house and suddenly heard a familiar voice behind her back. Who's that wonderful boy stomping around? Could it be Thomas, my favorite Katzen? Thomas smiled happily behind Nina, who was his godmother. She grabbed the boy in her arms and began to twirl in delight at his Libyan laughter. After Thomas was born, Nina changed her attitude towards children dramatically. She really wanted now to give birth to her own. Unfortunately, suitable candidates for the role of father did not appear on the horizon yet. Bathy's Kathy, a little Thomas, did not let him go from behind, whispered Kathy in his ear. "And I've already thought of something to give Resnick for his 1-year anniversary. It's been a long time coming, but he's gonna love it. And I won't even tell you yet. Let it be a surprise." The friends got distracted and immediately heard a loud cry. The little boy tripped and fell, scraping his ankles. But before Kathy could get to the boy, an unfamiliar man who was passing by jumped up. He lifted Thomas to his feet and went down on one knee, talked cheerfully to him. "Why is that big boy crying? Show me your hand." "Well, it's just a little scratch. No need to cry. We're men. Men don't cry." He winked at Thomas, and the boy was silent at once, looking at his palm and at the stranger with interest. While Kathy wiped his son's palms with wet wipes, Nina spoke coquettishly to the man. Lately, the woman had been on the hunt, and she regarded every male specimen as prey. And this specimen, it must be admitted, was quite good. Tall, broad-shouldered, good-looking. Kathy took Thomas in her arms and looked at the men carefully. "Don't you think? Or have we met somewhere before? Your face seems very familiar to me." He smiled. "Yes, we see you often. You always walk here with your son at this time. And I go to the cafe around the corner for lunch. I work as a sales consultant in a building supermarket." The man waved his hand toward the shopping center across the street from Kathy's house. "My name is Alex, by the way." Nina slightly grimaced upon hearing that the man was only a salesman, but nevertheless continued her onslaught on him. But to her disappointment, the man didn't pay any attention to her at all, talking only to Kathy and Thomas. A little chat. Alex ran off to work, not forgetting to wave goodbye to the boy. "Interesting individual," Nina said thoughtfully, looking after him. "But I have nothing to gain here. He is more interested in what?" "Oh, don't talk nonsense," laughed Kathy. "He was talking more to Thomas. He probably has a kid about the same age. That's why he got along so easily with my son." Maybe, Nina replied. "But I don't really care about that, by the way. You know, I'm not getting married. But as a potential father for my future child, I would consider him." That was the end of the discussion of the new acquaintance. But Kathy was not surprised when the next day, during their walk with Thomas, Nina came to visit him again. Kathy guessed that her friend was expecting to meet Alex, and he showed up, which was not surprising if, according to him, he went to the cafe every day at that time. The man didn't pass by, stopping to chat with his new acquaintances. But no matter how hard Nina tried to pull the blanket over him, all the man's attention was on Kathy and Thomas. And so it went on for a couple more days. And then Nina gave up, and then Alex never missed a day. He always stopped and spent half an hour with Kathy and the boy, referring to the fact that his lunch was an hour long. Kathy enjoyed chatting with his new acquaintance. Thomas was looking forward to seeing him. Meanwhile, the boy's birthday was approaching. Kathy told Alex that she had bought her son a children's sports complex for the youngest children, but she was not sure if she could assemble it. Then the man excitedly offered to help, but Kathy hesitated. Talking to him during walks is one thing, but to let him into her apartment is quite another. She didn't know anything about him except where he worked. Kathy asked, "What about your wife? Would she mind you helping a single woman?" Kathy's wife. "What are you talking about?" Alex smiled. "No, I have no one and never had anyone. I'm single as a finger. But judging by the way you communicate with Thomas, I thought that you have children. Well, at least some experience with them." "No children of my own. But I have 2 nephews, and I used to love hanging out with them until I went to DC. I'm not from around here." Wisconsin. "Overnight, I decided to change my life. So I came here. Thought maybe this is where I met my destiny. And you know, Met You Alex gave me a meaningful look of embarrassment and all the women she wasn't ready for. And in such a way Alex did not consider. And in general, Kathy did not look at men. Her heart was firmly occupied by Robert, thoughts of whom did not let her go. But nevertheless, Kathy let herself be persuaded and allowed the man to come to their house in the evening and help with the assembly of the sports complex. Unlike Robert, the superior, from the size of the stock apartment, when he first came to her, Alex paid no attention to it. As it turned out, the man's hands grew from the right place with the assembly of the complex. He undressed pretty quickly, but he was in no hurry to leave. He played with Thomas late into the night and seemed to enjoy it immensely. Kathy had nothing to do. How to offer him dinner, to which the man gladly agreed. He left only after Kathy had hinted in no uncertain terms that it was time for Thomas to go to bed. But before that, the man had asked to go to the boy's birthday party, saying that he had already thought of what present he would buy him. Kathy was just too embarrassed to say no. And a few days later, Alex was walking out of Kathy's driveway, quite pleased with himself. Everything seemed to be working out just fine this time. He had been to Thomas's birthday party today and seemed to have left a very good opinion of himself. This time he was confident with Kathy. He would get more than he had gotten from previous women. Alex had been living in Washington for almost 2 years now and had come here with the very definite purpose of finding a well-to-do woman and living off her. He had never liked to work, but what if he had a clue? That there are a lot of wealthy and single women in Washington, delight in male attention, and for their sake they are ready to do anything. Alex has a huge plus attractive appearance. He knew his price and wanted to take advantage of it. Unfortunately, his previous Moscow relationship had ended badly. Then he targeted a much older woman who was a rich widow. Alex had succeeded in gaining her trust. The old woman seemed to fall in love with him like a cat and let him live off her. But then he asked her for a large sum of money, referring to the fact that he allegedly got involved in a murky story and was in debt. She gave him the money, of course. But at the same time, she hired a detective to follow the young lover. And that's when she found out how easy and fun he was to sit down her money in clubs. With girls of easy virtue, the woman threw Alex out of her house without even giving him a peep for his own good. Didn't want to work either, so he had to find himself a new cash cow. He found out about Kathy in a club, having met there with a Bolshie who worked at a movie studio. Having had too much to drink, she called him about her colleague, abandoned with a child, who, however, everything is easy for her, as she does not need money. Cautiously inquired about the details from neighbors Kathy and Alex. Was pleasantly surprised to learn that she owns a huge 2-bedroom apartment. How much could such an apartment be worth? I can't even imagine. This time Alex decided not to hurry and to approach the matter more carefully, so to speak, consciously. He even got a job near Kathy's house, found out what time she walks with the child. And then the man patiently walked by, looking for the right moment for acquaintance. And then the perfect opportunity presented itself. Thomas fell. The presence of the child did not frighten Alex at all, because he knew perfectly well. The easiest way to get to a mom's heart is through her kid. If the child likes you, the mother likes you. So Alex began his acquaintance flirting with the boy. If he wanted, he found common language with children, although he couldn't stand these children. Then Alex began to show persistence. The man spent most of his time with Thomas and saw perfectly well that Kathy liked it. And the boy did not want to let Uncle Alex go at all. And that was good for him, too. It was just a pity that tomorrow he had to go to that hateful job again. Well, not for that. He'd come to Washington to be an errand boy. He had far-reaching plans. The children's party was over, and the guests had dispersed. Kathy invited some of her colleagues from the movie studio with young children. Thomas could not tear himself away from the many presents, but the day was too eventful, and the boy fell asleep cuddling the talking teddy bear given by Uncle Alex. Nina helped Kathy clean the apartment, but she was in no hurry to leave. She really wanted to discuss Alex. I see the salesman's been coming around a lot. Did you two have a thing? No, well, I'm willing to think about it. Alex really likes Thomas, and that's the most important thing. And Robert left us, and I can't stop thinking about him. But it doesn't have to be that way. Maybe to get it out of my head. Robert, that's exactly what I need, Alex. Yes? Then again, I've got a boy growing up, and a boy always needs a male role model in front of him. Nina pondered her friend's words, slightly biting down on her lower lip as she considered Alex for herself. She was fine with him because she was only looking at his looks, but thinking about Alex as a life partner for Kathy. For some reason, that thought made the girl uneasy. Kathy, take your time. Alex, of course, is a handsome young man, nice to talk to, funny, likes to mess around with Thomas. That's all fine, but you know what's bugging me? He's too good. I'd say he's perfect. I don't understand why, and the reality of it really bothers me. There's no such thing as a man without flaws. Robert has plenty of them, and Alex looks like he has them. but they're just not there at all. There's no such thing, especially not out of the blue. He showed up here in the apartment of a single woman with a baby. Doesn't that scare you? Kathy laughed and put her arm around her friend's shoulders. It's just more pressure. Or maybe it's jealousy. I know it very well, and I wanted to get Alex myself, but it so happened that he liked me better. Well, then it's not fate. Girlfriend, you'll meet someone else. Everything will be fine for you. Itch and was quiet for a while, and then changed the subject to discussing how much fun Thomas's birthday had been. She originally thought that talking about Alex would end it. She realized that her words could be seen as jealousy, and that makes sense in their situation. Except it wasn't. Nina wasn't jealous at all. She sincerely loved Kathy and would have been glad for her happiness, would have yielded to her this Alex herself, if she had been sure that he was really what he wanted to seem. But here was her intuition telling her that he wasn't. A couple months later, Alex moved in with Kathy. Their relationship began about 2 weeks after Thomas's birthday. One night, Alex didn't want to leave and took the initiative to kiss Kathy, and she gave in. That was the first time he stayed with her until morning. Then it began to happen more and more often. And eventually, Kathy offered Alex to stay with her so he wouldn't have to rent an apartment for nothing. What was the point of coming back to the rented place in the morning and then driving here to work? Alex agreed with great joy, and on the same day, he moved his belongings to her place in one small suitcase. The happiest of all was Thomas, who became very attached to Alex's uncle in the evenings. When he came back from work, the boy ran to meet him in the hallway and didn't leave the men the whole evening. Alex, to be honest, was tired of being a caring father. But he continued to play this role, gritting his teeth. When Nina came to visit them, she saw the idyll reigning in the house. But she did not talk about Alex with Kathy, believing that time will put everything in its place. Kathy has already suffered enough. She deserves happiness, and now she looks quite satisfied, although she didn't love the man. Nina knew that for a fact. After all, not at all like the friend she had been with Robert, whom she loved to the point of madness. Today, Kathy sat at the table and looked at the frozen dinner without blinking. Alex was late from work, which had never happened before. It had been 2 hours since the store where he worked had closed, but the man was still gone. She was about to call him when she'd heard the front door open. A woman had long ago handed him the keys that used to belong to Robert. Kathy heard the cheerful minutes of Thomas greeting Uncle Alex, but there was no usual cheerful greeting from the man. And into the kitchen where Kathy was waiting for him, heating up a stale dinner. Alex walked in sad and lost. And the fact that he refused and slumped down at the kitchen table, clasping his head with his hands. Did something happen? Asked a worried Kathy. Yes, it did. I don't even know how to tell you. Kathy, there's been a major shortage in our store. And not only am I being fired, but they're making me pay for it. And I had nothing to do with it. Alex bewilderedly spread his hands. I did not take anything at all, you know. And I have no money to pay the shortages. You know, I am what I am. I don't know how to save and save money. So what do we do now? Honestly, I don't know what to do. The man folded his hands on the table in front of him and laid his head down on them with a heavy sigh. Kathy was a little confused at first, but hurried to encourage the men. Lush, well, this can happen to anyone. Do not be so upset about it. The shortfall is big. Big, Kathy, very big. Just Alex, without raising his head, over $2,000. Where am I going to get that kind of money? I'll probably have to get a loan. She smiled. I think it is not necessary to rush into a headlong rush. It's not a very large sum. I think I can help you. I'll give you the money. Alex raised his head sharply and stared at Kathy's face in bewilderment. Do you really think it's a small amount of money? Look, there's a lot I don't know about you. You're probably on maternity leave. I don't think you make much. I'm sorry to pry. You don't have to answer, but where did you get the money? Yeah, it's no secret. My father left me a bank account and stocks that I get a monthly income from. So we can easily pay off the shortfall with you and not be disadvantaged in any way. No, I can't do that. Alex exclaimed, raising his eyebrows indignantly. It's a lot of money for me, and I'm not sure I can pay you back anytime soon. Kathy walked up to him and, putting her hands on his shoulders, said, "Don't worry, I'm helping you for free. Understand, money in life is not the most important thing we are together. And this is valuable to me. And by the way, I know why you couldn't save anything. You spent your entire paycheck buying toys for Thomas and me all the time. So take the money, pay your shortfall, and don't worry about a thing. And Kathy, I'm out of work, and I don't know when I'll get a new job. Would you want to live with me now? Like this?" But she just laughed again. "Do I give the impression of such a mercantile woman? I didn't live with you because of your salary." After much persuasion, Alex let himself be persuaded by taking money from Kathy. And the next day, he paid off the shortfall. He didn't expect it to go so smoothly. Of course, there was no actual shortfall. The man got fed up with the work, so he figured out a way to get out of there and still make a profit. For nothing. He spent so much time ducking Kathy with her vacation. He can finally get some rest, without having to get up in the morning hating the store. And he doesn't have to think about money. The main thing is not to relax and keep pussyfooting around with her and chewing on her back. Single women are so hungry for attention. After he quit his job, he started getting up at midnight. He'd eat and leave the house, supposedly to look for a new job. The man would return in the evening tired and disappointed. He complained to Kathy that he had to go to interviews all over Washington, and taking public transportation was too time-consuming. And one day, in a joking Alex way, he said, "It's a pity that you don't have a car, and you could drive me in search of a job, and you would develop a little. But you sit at home all day long." Kathy is instantly revitalized. "You know, I've been thinking about it. As long as Thomas and I lived alone, we didn't need cars. I don't like driving. I haven't driven in a long time. I'm used to it. You can buy a car, but you have to drive it. You'll do it." "Are you serious?" Alex exclaimed with joy. "You can afford a car. Definitely not kidding. But it would be just great. But if it, of course, will not cause tangible damage to your budget." "It won't," Kathy reassured the man. "Tomorrow we'll go with you to the car dealership and pick out a car for us." "Not us, but you," Alex corrected Kathy. "I don't want to be an accessory. This car will be yours alone. And I, if you wish, will be your personal driver." The next day at the car dealership, Kathy was looking at cars of medium price category. But Alex was magnetically drawn to expensive ones, especially to the client Gruzdev, whose purchase Kathy was not planning to buy. But seeing how joyfully her man's eyes glisten when he looks at this expensive car, the woman decided to take it. Although Alex discouraged, saying that he just dreams of such a car. That such a car is just a dream, and you can buy something simpler. Dreams should come true, smiled the woman and went to formalize the expensive purchase. When she and the manager of the car dealership sat down at the checkout table, Kathy realized with dismay that she had no documents with her. First, she dug through her purse, trying to find them there, and then she emptied the entire contents of her bag onto the table. But to no avail. There were no documents. How could she forget them at home? They were always in her purse. Alex the theatrical got upset. "Well, how could it be? We went to buy a car, and you forgot your documents at home. Now we have to drive home and back again. Thomas, I'm tired. I always carry my papers with me." Alex patted the people's pocket. Kathy looked at his son sitting in his arms. The child did look tired. And then a bold idea popped into her head. "Give me your papers. We'll put the car in your name." "No, no, no. Kathy, that's impossible. This car has to be yours." "Yes. Why does it have to be? Who decided that? Who cares who it's registered to? Give me the papers," I said. And Kathy held out her hand demandingly. The man reluctantly reached into his breast pocket, pulling out his paperwork until the last of it, while the manager did the paperwork. Alex shook his head and muttered, "No, this is still wrong." The manager, who was conducting the registration, went outside for a smoke and watched a brand new Land Cruiser roll out of the showroom. The gleams in the sun fell flat on its sides. The guy grinned and thought, why are women so stupid? After all, everything is so obvious. Behind the wheel of the car sat Alex's importance. He had already praised himself 100 times for his ingenuity. for having so thoughtfully put out of the stock bag all the documents. He's a brilliant strategist after all. Knows how to push a woman's buttons. Just a hint of baby fatigue and bam, he's got the car in his pocket. Now, even if things go wrong with Kathy, if she stops sponsoring him, he'll never get that car back. It's his property now, and you can't take it from him with your teeth. It had been quite some time since he bought the car, and Alex still couldn't find a job, and it seemed like he wasn't looking for one anymore. Quietly, living on Kathy's money, the woman was not bothered by it at all. On the contrary, she was glad that Alex was spending so much time with Thomas. Sometimes he left the house in the evenings, feeling the urge to go for a ride, as he put it. Kathy, who was afraid of high speed, was happy to stay at home. She had no objection to his trips. The man she loved needed privacy, and sometimes he needed to be alone. What's the big deal? But Nina objected. She was beginning to resent the state of affairs in Kathy's household. One evening when Alex went for a drive, Nina came to visit her godson and found them alone again. She started talking to her friends. "Kathy, are you really satisfied with everything? Your Alex hasn't thought about getting a job. And in fact, where he is, will rot alone in your car. You're sure he's alone? Why shouldn't I trust him?" Kathy objected, shrugging her shoulders. "He called us Matyushin with him. But Alex likes a lot of speed, and I don't like it, especially with a baby in the car. So I don't mind if he goes for a ride alone sometimes. Ride alone, live off you. Kathy, are you out of your mind?" "Nina, you know I don't like to make excuses either, but I'll make an exception for you. Let's start with the fact that he's looking for a job. But I wouldn't want to take the first job that comes along. Alex is a grown man, and I'd like a decent job with a high salary. And given that we are not poor, I do not rush him. Let the man is looking for something that will be to his liking. Well, as for trust, this I have already said. I trust him as myself, so I was not afraid to register the car on him." "You did something," Nina gasped in indignation. "What do you mean? Put it in his name." "Kathy, are you crazy? I didn't expect that from you. You know, whatever Robert did to you, I've been on his side lately. You're still legally married to him, and yet you're living with another man. I don't think you should even tell your husband that. And the money. Robert, I send you money every month, a lot of it, by the way. And you're buying another man's car. Has anyone ever told me that about you before? I wouldn't have believed it. Kathy, what's going on with you when your friend says that?" Kathy's already losing her temper, raising her voice. "You know what? If you think I'm spending Robert's money on my man, I'm not. Out of what Robert sends me, I haven't spent a penny on Thomas. I opened an account, and all his father's money is transferred there. And with Alex, we live on my money. And you've quickly forgotten what Robert did to us. You're the one who comforted me and called him a jerk. Why now? Is he all white and fluffy now? Yes, if you must know, I still love him and I can't get over it. If Robert left me alone at night like that, I'd be nervous. But when Alex does it, I don't care. He's a very nice man, though, and I hope I can love him someday because honestly, I do." Kathy was quiet for a moment and then continued in a much calmer voice. "You're probably right about Robert and I not being divorced. I owe it to him to let him know that I have someone else. At least it'll be fair to them. Let them file for divorce. You know when he said he was taking it slow? At first I was happy, hoping he'd come to his senses, want to look at his son, couldn't stand it and come back to us. But with each passing month, the hope faded, and now there is no hope at all. So maybe it's time for a divorce. You're right about that. I believed he'd come back to you too." Nina said quietly, "I know, I'm pretty sure Robert loves you, but he's a very strange man. It's as if he has a stone for a heart. Does he never once want to look at his son? I don't understand. But both women were wrong. Very wrong. Robert wanted to see both Kathy and his son, but he was a man of his own oddities and unwilling to compromise his principles. Once in his life, he swore to himself not to have any more children. To him, it seemed Kathy betrayed him, secretly became pregnant, then choosing not a life with him together, but a child. But the man couldn't help himself. He wanted to see those he considered his family, even if they didn't live together. Sometimes the desire to see them became unbearable. So the man traveled to Washington. He sought his son, saw him a few times from the sidelines, stayed away so as not to disturb Kathy's heart and give her false hope of his return. But with each of his visits, the protective armor of Robert died away, and hesitation appeared in her soul. So when Robert was offered a permanent job in Germany and a residence permit, the man went to Washington again before deciding. This time he wanted to approach Kathy and his son, talk, and then decide what he really wanted. When the man drove a cab into the yard and was already paying the driver, he saw his wife and son coming out of the entrance. But they were coming out of there. They were not alone. There was a man with him, holding his son's hand. The three of them got into an expensive car parked outside the entryway and drove off in an unknown direction. Not a muscle flinched on Robert's face. When he told the cabbie, "I changed my mind and we're going back," pulling out of the yard, the driver could not even guess what storm was raging in the soul of his passenger, how his heart was crusted with ice, and what thoughts were in his head. "You're late. You're certainly late. Kathy, beautiful woman. Did I really think she'd be alone forever? And why should she be alone? After all, I never gave her hope of my return. The man walking beside her looks good, but the child or not. He's got a nice car too, so he's well off. Well, Kathy deserves her happiness. Let her be lucky, and I'll go back to Germany for good this time. That's what I should do." It was only now that Robert realized how much he wanted to be behind the wheel of the very car that had taken his family away, or any other car or no car, for that matter, just to be near them. To spit on all his principles and his oaths. But it's too late. It's too late. And Kathy and Alex went to the supermarket that night to get groceries. It was probably the only place they ever went together. Many times Kathy suggested that Alex leave the boy with Nina to go to the movies or the theater where she and Robert often went together. But Alex was not interested. He refused, and the woman resigned herself to stopping calling him anywhere. After buying groceries, the couple returned home. Alex took the bags into the hallway and ran off, telling Kathy that he would be gone for a while. To air out, the man quickly jumped out of the entryway and pinged the alarm cars. He had already opened the driver's door when he heard a loud and caustic exclamation behind him. "But hello, hubby. I finally found you." Alex looked back frightened to see his wife in front of him. He had always been a little afraid of this overbearing, cruel woman. Years ago, she had married him to her, when her pregnancy became known, but after living with her for 8 years, Alex had run away, leaving her with 2 children. This life was not for him. What did he see? Work, work, and more work. And the wife was always not enough. She was always nagging Alex and forcing him to take part-time jobs. For 2 years, he has been hiding quite safely from his wife and from the heavy family life, pulling all the veins out of him. "How did you find me?" he asked. "What does it matter? Let it remain my secret." Jenna laughed rudely. "Is there nothing else you want to ask me?" Alex looked around again. It seemed Kathy should be busy right now, sorting through grocery bags. But what the hell was the matter? What if she looked out the window and saw him and Jenna? How would he explain all this then? The man quickly offended the cars and opened the passenger door hospitably. "Idem pro Katja, but it's a ride. Why don't we get a ride?" Answered the woman and threateningly spit on the seat. With admiration began to examine the interior of the car. "And you are not bad," Alex settled down. "The car is gorgeous. And how are your children doing?" "I haven't thought about it. What do they eat? What are they wearing? Are they sick? You run away and don't pay child support. That's a good daddy." Alex focused on the road out of the yard and remained silent. He had to gather his thoughts, how to behave with Jenna. What to do next? What did she know? Did she know about Kathy? The man glanced at his wife, who was examining the contents of the stub. And when he saw Kathy's things in it, he slammed it shut with indignation. Noticing her husband's slanted glance at her, she shrieked, "What's the matter with the year? And do I know about your grandmother? You can bet your ass I do. I know everything, how you live at her expense, not working anywhere, how on her typewriter you tell. Before I approached you, I made inquiries." Alex sighed heavily. But you see the light. You yourself know everything. You understand everything. Yes, I live at her expense. But I don't love her. Jenna squealed again. What are you talking about? You don't love her? I don't care. What do you think? Am I jealous? It's stupid to be jealous of you. You've never loved anyone. I know exactly why you're living with that woman. You didn't love me and you didn't love your children, but they're your children nonetheless. Do you have an obligation to them? I mean, you tried to file for divorce, but that's never going to happen. Remember that. The man was silent. He understood what his wife was getting at. She wanted money. Just money. And where would he get it? He was living off Kathy himself. Jenna didn't like Alex's silence, and she shouted even louder. Why don't you say something? Do you even know how much child support you owe? We're not divorced, but I filed for alimony. I could sick the bailiffs on you right now for taking so long to track you down. But I'm not going to do that just yet. That's how you're going to pay me. Your new girl's rich, fancy apartment car, and we don't have a dime to our name. Your kids, don't they deserve better? Anyway, we talked this chicken into selling. You'll take the apartment. She has all the money. We'll go away. We'll go far away. You'll live with us. I won't let you go anymore. What are you talking about? Alex was scared. How is it to persuade to sell the apartment? What do you think a crazy person would do? Kathy will never agree to that. She's already looking at me askew lately. I'm even thinking of getting a simple job, to be honest. And you think I care? Jenna smirked. Think of something. Fool your Kathy for your kids. You haven't forgotten that you have two of them, a boy and a girl. Name them. Come on, Jenna, stop wrinkling your nose like a toothache. Alex, I never forgot about the kids. But what am I supposed to do? You were always short of money. What was I supposed to do? Well, I can't, as you say, and work 3 jobs. Knowing you can't do anything but twirl your tail in front of women. So keep on wagging it. But she's doing it so that me and the kids will be well off. Do you have any idea how much your Kathy's apartment could be worth? You and I could buy a decent house in the country and live on the rest. I don't know. Lunch. Maybe we can work out some kind of business deal. Jenna, do you hear yourself? Alex howled. She won't sell the apartment. I can't make her do it. She'll lie. What is there men in such cases usually lie? Say that you have debts, that you're sick? Need money for treatment? But Alex still shook his head negatively. She will not believe me. I'm all the time in front of her eyes. And even if she would believe me, she will not pay neither debts nor treatment. We've only been living together for a few months, and she has no strong feelings for me. I can see that. She may like me, but that's about it. I know how a woman behaves when she loves. Kathy doesn't love me. Jenna lowered her head and suddenly blushed. When she spoke again, tears were almost audible in her voice. Yes, you know when you're loved, and I loved you very much, you felt it. And after me, there must have been women who fell in love with you. And you betrayed them. To me, to the children of everyone you cared about. But only I know your true nature. You're a man capable of loving only yourself and valuing your well-being above everything else. Taking care of your family was beyond you. That's right. Did the kids miss you? They kept asking me where Dad was and what I should have told them. Daddy cowardly ran away and hid from us because he doesn't want to feed you. All right, Jenna, that's enough. Stop feeling sorry for yourself. It doesn't help. There's really nothing I can do. All I can do is beg. From Kathy a small amount now and then and give it to you. But there's no way to get her to sell the apartment. No, it's not enough. Very seriously answered Jenna. I will not live patiently on your meager handouts. I've already had enough from bread to water. Now I need everything at once. Suit yourself, spin. Think about it, but do what I say. Otherwise, I'll come straight to your apartment with the bailiffs. Now, let's go to the kids. Let them remember what your daddy looks like too. Maybe they'll have a little conscience. What am I talking about? What kind of conscience do you have? All right, let's go see the kids. Speaking of money, how much do you have right now? We've got to eat something and pay the rent. Kathy was sitting in a chair trying to read a book. Thomas was playing nearby, rolling his toy cars on the floor, but the woman's thoughts were occupied not with her son, but with Alex, who was watching soccer on the couch in the next room. It was the man's main occupation when he was at home to lie on the couch and stare at the TV. Even Thomas felt the detachment, began to pick up less often, were separated with requests to play with him. The woman slowly began to realize that in her mighty effort to forget Robert, she had let a man into her home without recognizing him. Bought on an outer shell, but the shell, it had to be admitted, was good. Nothing to fault. Kathy was in no hurry to make final conclusions, but she began to probe the ground and from time to time asked how the job search was going. Alex waved away, answering that he had not found anything suitable yet. "What are you looking for?" Kathy asked the question head-on. "What kind of job would be right for you?" Alex hesitated, surprised at the assertiveness of the women. His vague answers had satisfied her before. Had she begun to suspect something? Men with a charming smile approached Kathy, then poked her on the cheek. "Well, so appropriate," playfully. Conspired he to spend more time with you and for the paycheck to be normal. "I want to provide for you and Thomas fully, not just live next door." "So you're looking for a job where you can spend as little time as possible and still get a big paycheck?" Kathy asked with a chuckle. Kathy, well, there's no need to exaggerate. Alex frowned a little. At that time, Thomas, hitting the corner of the table, and Alex immediately rushed over to him. Finishing the conversation, that evening and the next few days he did not leave the child again. At first it was as if he had come to his senses, but it already seemed suspicious. And now the woman looked at the book, but could not read a single line. Thoughts kept jumping to Alex. Was she wrong about him? The woman slammed the book, shut in one sharp movement, and standing up resolutely, headed for the next room. The thought occurred to her how to check men. "Lesh, I was thinking we should sell our car," she said, coming to the sofa, where the man was lying. He seemed to be thrown on the spot, and he abruptly sat up and stared at Kathy. "What happened? Why? What's wrong with our car?" "Well, I guess we can't afford it. The tax is too high. And I made the mistake of buying such an expensive vehicle. It hit my budget. I'd say it's a big one. Let's sell it and buy something simpler." Alex was seething with anger. It was a car he'd originally considered his own and couldn't afford to sell. Besides, Kathy would probably take the money from the sale. But now he just couldn't refuse. Otherwise, it would be necessary to take the car and run away from this woman. And before, that's probably what he would have done. And now he couldn't. He was under a lot of pressure from Jenna, constantly sending threatening texts. So it was in Alex's best interest not to undermine Kathy's trust, so he responded. "What can you say? Sell means sell. Let me put an ad out. I'll meet the buyer myself." A somewhat calm woman left the room, and Alex thought to advertise doesn't mean to sell at all. "Can we stall? That's what I'll do. I'll point out the flaws to the buyers myself so they won't buy. Or you can inflate the price. The main thing is to meet with them without Kathy." Alex felt like a cornered animal. Jenna was pushing him, and it was bad timing. Kathy's eyes were starting to open. Lying on the couch was not an option right now. So the man jumped up and went to the baby. He was supposed to be meeting with the entourage today, and to leave quietly without causing Kathy's displeasure. It was necessary to pay attention to Thomas. After playing with the child for about an hour, Alex told Kathy that he would be away for a while, and the woman nodded silently. Alex drove to his wife with a heavy heart. He had nothing to please her, but every time crossing the threshold of the filming house, which was rented by Jenna with his children, the man realized that his wife was right about something. Why do their children have to live in this room? And Thomas is going crazy in there. Kathy doesn't know what toys to buy him, what to feed him. This one's got a back, a hernia, everything. You can't surprise him with food. What did that snot-nosed snot deserve, and what did Kathy deserve? She didn't earn that money herself, so in Alex's opinion, it's only fair that his kids have a good life too. Even though he left them with ease, he realized that they were his children, and he had a different attitude towards them than towards strangers. Jenna, on the other hand, met her husband with a frown. "Well, what am I happy about? Have you thought of anything?" Alex gave her a disgruntled look. "I didn't think of anything." Not only that Kathy began to look at me, my every action looks at me like under a microscope. She's been hounding me for a job. It's not gonna work out with you and me, Jenna. I knew you weren't capable of anything. Here's an idea. Think about what your Kathy cares about more than anything else in the world. What she would give all her money for without even thinking about it. Alex immediately answered yes, of course, my son. What else? Like all women, girls in general are narrow-minded, fixated on their offspring. Jenna looked at her husband almost with hatred. I'd kill you for saying that. Now you've shown your attitude toward your children. Oh, come on, he waved his hand. Why am I surprised? I know what you're like. Now, back to Kathy and her son. Suppose they steal him and demand a ransom for him. What will she do, sell her apartment? Alex, the thought of it broke out in a cold sweat. He jumped up so sharply from the chair he was sitting on that it fell to the floor. Are you completely crazy? What are you suggesting? I may like to live at other people's expense, but it's not a crime. I don't steal from anyone, they give me everything. And I'm not going to jail. Jenna, I'm not a criminal. Well, let's just say I'm not going to jail either. That's why we got to make sure I don't go to jail. You said it yourself, this broad's starting to look at you. It won't be long before she throws you out with your ass naked. And then what? I ain't gonna feed your kids alone no more, and I ain't letting you go. We'll go back to scraping by. You're gonna have to get a job, I mean. And not just sitting around, but actually working. Maybe even physically. So you might want to think about taking a chance. Jenna, what are you, stupid? She goes to the police, they'll be on to you and me in a heartbeat. That's why your job is to make sure she doesn't go to the police. You'll be with her 24/7 to talk her out of it. Send her a piece of hair from her head, her non-visible, like Thomas, and say, go to the police. Next up is the ear. I saw that in some movie, or something like that. And you're gonna scare her and talk her out of going to law enforcement. And if she's desperate enough to go to the police, we'll get her baby back. Alex left that meeting with the same heavy heart. He had a plan he didn't like very much. A few days later, Kathy was walking with Thomas on the playground in the yard of her own house. When she got the call from Alex, he had left to go to the pharmacy to get some painkillers. He had a terrible headache, so he called her for advice. What's the best drug to buy? They talked for a long time. He was stalling as long as he could. I asked him about one drug or the other. Eligibility. The woman, distracted by the conversation, for a few minutes, lost sight of her son, and then looking around, did not find him near. At first, Kathy wasn't too bothered by this. She thought that the child was just playing hide and seek with her, and was now sitting behind the slide or behind the house. But the alarm began to grow and gradually turned to panic. When she ran, all the playground along and across did not find the child on it. Returning from the drugstore, Alex found Kathy in hysterics. She approached other moms walking on the playground with their kids and asked them if anyone had seen her son. All the women looked sympathetically, but shook their heads negatively. And only one said that she had probably seen a boy with similar clothes. And he was being led out of the courtyard of the apartment building by a woman in a hood. But this witness did not see her face and did not pay any attention to those who passed by, because the child was walking calmly. Hearing this, Kathy nervously pulled the phone out of her pocket and in a broken voice asked Alex police how to call the police from a cell phone, says rather. Alex did not have time to answer anything because the phone in Kathy's hands rang. The woman dropped the call, not wanting to talk to an unknown caller. She had to urgently call the police, but she did not have time to dial the number again. Another call came in. Answer it, Kathy, Alex said insistently. Answer it, it might be important. Kathy obediently raised the phone to her ear. Alex saw her face twisted. Horror at the words she heard in the receiver. The moms walking with their children twitched as they heard her hysterical scream. Who are you? Give me back Thomas. Give me back my son. Then Kathy put the phone down and looked at it confused, as if not believing what she had just heard. Then Alex jumped up to her, grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her. Kathy, who called? What did they tell you? They said they had Thomas and told me not to call the police, or I'd never see him again, the woman answered, unnaturally calm and loud. Alex looked around, worried that no one would hear her words. He took the woman by the shoulders and tried to lead her to the entrance. Let's go, let's go. Let's go up to the apartment and discuss everything there. What apartment? Kathy looked at him in astonishment. What am I going to do there without my son? I'm not leaving here until I find him. Alex again, loss of cars, some women. Kathy credits himself with kidnapping him. We're not going to find him here. Let's go upstairs, and you can tell me all about it. The woman, like a mechanical doll, let Alex drive her home. There he sat her in a chair and brought her a glass of water. And then he asked her to tell clearly what you were told on the phone. Whose voice was it? Male, female? Come on, give me all the details. It was neither male nor female. Computerized. Modified, probably through some kind of program. In short, it was Kathy on the highway. This voice told me that they have my son and that we are being watched and our phones tapped. If only we would try to contact the police. I will never see my son again. It was all of a sudden a woman came by. She was hysterical. She continued to scream something coherent and tossed aside the glass of water offered by Alex. The man had to slap her in the face to bring the woman to her senses, capturing the instant reddening of her cheek. She stared at him in bewilderment. Come to your senses, he told her. This is no time to be hysterical. Thomas needs a cool-headed mother. What were you told? What were they kidnapping him for? What were their demands? Demands I don't understand, Kathy interjected. Oh yes, demands. Yes, they did. They said I had to give them money. They'll tell me the amount later. They call me back in the morning. Until then, they told me to sit tight and stay put. That's what they said, you know, don't do anything. So don't do anything, Kathy. We don't know who these people are. Aren't you scared about Thomas? You keep telling yourself to call the police. Have you ever considered that they're carrying out their threats and hurting the baby? How are you going to live with that? No way, Kathy shrugged. I can't live without my boy, but I can't just sit around and wait. I can't, you know. I have to. Alex tried to sober the woman up. Let's wait for the next call of kidnappers and find out exactly what they want from you. Money is understandable. The question is, how much will they ask for? Kathy, if it's no secret, how much do you have in that account you were talking about? Can you pay these kidnappers? When the woman said the amount, Alex inwardly gasped. He didn't expect such a thing. And also money from the sale of the apartment. So he estimated in his mind, even if he sold the apartment at a lower value because of the urgency, plus money from the account. The amount of money was so much that it made the man dizzy. And Jenna was right, that money could be used to live the rest of his life without poverty, if he didn't spend it, of course. Alex calmed Kathy, who was born like a shadow in the apartment, and from time to time began to sob. And close to midnight, he put her to bed on positive sedatives. The man himself was lying next to her, fighting sleep. He was afraid he would fall asleep, and Kathy would call the police after all. She'd been dying to do it all day, and the man was not wrong. Lying down for about half an hour, she got out of bed and went into the kitchen, covering herself behind her. Following her, the man had time to see her dialing the police number and immediately snatched the phone from her hands. Kathy, what are you doing? Don't you realize you could kill your son with that call? It may sound cruel, but it's true. The woman, despite the large amount of sedative she drank, became hysterical again. I don't know what's best. I'm afraid. I can't sleep without the priest. And it was only at 3:00 a.m. that the sedative did its job, and Kathy fell asleep. Then Alex got out of bed and quietly left the apartment. He went downstairs, stepped out of the entryway, and carefully placed a small, inconspicuous box under the bench. That was the plan. And then, sitting down on that very bench, he called Jenna. So far, everything is going as we agreed, he said curtly, but she was trying to call the police again. I'm afraid to leave her alone. When you call in the morning, be more convincing. Put more fear into her. By the way, how's the kid? What's going to happen to him? Your kid? He was better worried about his own, whining all day long, asking to see his mom. Now they're gone. You better answer me. Did you find out how much you can ask for? How much is in her account? I found out, Jenna. I found out. I'll tell you right now, you're freaking out. Maybe you're right. Maybe you and I didn't go through all this for nothing. It was only 6:30 on the clock, and Kathy was already sitting with the phone in her hands, staring at it as if it were a hypnotist. She stared into the dark screen, waiting for the call to ring. Alex coaxed the woman to put the phones down, to drink coffee, to calm down a little, but Kathy didn't listen to his entreaties. The bell rang at 8:30. Waiting. Asked the emotionless mechanical voice. Waiting, and you tried to call the police. We warned you. We know all about you. You and your Haldane are under 24-hour surveillance. You shouldn't have. Oh, you shouldn't have tried that. Go down to your front porch. There's a box under the bench with a present in it for you. I'll call you back later. The phone rang a short beep. Kathy, what a pity. I jumped up and ran out of the apartment, and Alex followed her with shaking hands. The woman pulled a small black box from under the bench, but she couldn't open it. She stared at it. She was afraid to take the lid off, afraid of what she might see inside. Alex opened the box for her, and inside was a piece of dark, clean hair. It was Thomas's hair. Kathy recognized them immediately and burst into tears of relief. It was just hair. The woman was very afraid to see something worse in there. The second call came as soon as Kathy and Alex returned to the apartment. Did you find our present? We thought we'd take pity on you for a while. Next time it won't be hair. Believe me, you didn't take our words seriously. We have nothing to lose. Have you decided what's more important, money or your kid's life? How much do you want for Thomas? Stuttering voice? Kathy asked, and when she heard the answer, she shouted into the phone. But I don't have that much, just don't have that much. Then the woman put the phone down and looked at Alex with eyes full of terror. Disconnected. Confused, she said. Only they called such a sum, where I will take so much. And they also said that the term I have a week in a week I have to give them all this. Yes, the amount, of course, is unbearable, said Alex. Of course, you have it in your account, but you have to get the rest. Listen, what about the apartment? You can sell the apartment. Suddenly he exclaimed, as if he had just had an epiphany. The apartment, it's in your name. Well, of course it's in my name. Who else to sell the place to just never occurred to her. But first of all, the sale would take a long time, well over a week. If only the cost is lower to make 2 agencies to turn. The woman grabbed her head. And then what are we going to do? Where will my son and I live? Don't worry. Alex stepped up to Kathy and hugged her. We'll figure it out somehow. I'll go to work. I'm with you. The important thing is to get our boy back. What if they don't bring him back? What if I give them everything I have and they don't give me the baby? Then it's too late to go to the police. It has to be done now. I don't know. I don't understand anything. Kathy continued holding her head and swaying bitterly from side to side. What is the right thing to do? I'm ready to give everything. But where are the guarantees? Alex, horror recoiled from the woman. What are you, Kathy? What police? Don't you care about your son's life at all? You did not understand the meaning of the surprise in the box. Give them the money and be happy that you had it, and you were able to buy the life of your own child for them. Let's get down to business. Let's better think about the best way to get things done quickly. First of all, we need to start by cashing out your account. Or should I sell the apartments first? Yeah, the condos, of course, I can cash out anytime I want. Well, or in a couple of days. Having previously submitted an application, it's certainly not long. But the apartments are going to the agency right now. Kathy couldn't sit still. She needed something to do. And if not the police, then it was urgent to start collecting money. And sometime later, Nina was moving near Kathy's entrance with a huge bag of Lego Constructor in her hands she had bought for her godson. It was the 10th time she had picked up Kathy, but she wasn't picking up the phone, and Nina didn't know what to do. Calls to the intercom didn't bring any results either. Having tried for 40 minutes near the entrance and not stopping calling her friend, Nina decided to leave and come back later. And suddenly she saw a familiar car driving into the yard, barely waited until she parked and rushed to the exit Land Cruiser Kathy. Well, where are you guys driving around? Why aren't you answering your phone, Kathy? What's wrong with your phone? she asked a disgruntled Alex. It was he who had persuaded her not to answer Nina's call, explaining that it was better not to tell her friend anything. She's too chatty. Not noticing her friend's frowning face, Alex started to open the back door of the car with the words, "Where's my sweet boy? Where's Thomas?" But staring at the empty child's seat, she was surprised. "Kathy, Thomas, where did you leave him with who?" "Come, let's go upstairs to our place," Kathy replied glumly. And not only now she noticed her grief-stricken face. They went up to the apartment, went into the room, and Kathy sank down on the sofa like an inflatable doll, from which all the air had been abruptly let out, and once again began to sob for her tears. Nina could barely understand what her friend was telling her. But Alex sat down next to her, and he complimented Kathy's story. Nina couldn't sit. She walked around the couch from side to side. And when she heard the whole story, she exclaimed, "So it turns out that if you completely cash out the account and sell the apartment, the amount will be just right. Is that right? Don't you think it's weird?" "What's weird about it?" Alex answered instead of Kathy. "These kidnappers said that they were watching our every move, and it's not surprising that they know about the account. They probably made inquiries before the kidnapping." Nina gave Alex a scornful look for eyes in death, so it made the man uncomfortable. And then he said, "Alex, can't you leave the room? I want to talk to my friend, alone." He didn't move from his seat and glanced defiantly at Nina, and then at Kathy, as if looking to her for support and not wanting to get out. But Kathy only asked to get out. "Please, hurt for souls." The man got up from the couch and with his whole appearance showed his displeasure. Left the room, leaving it some time quietly opened the door, fearing that the man would overhear their conversation. And she was right. He was standing near the door, pretending to correct something on the nightstand, and at the sight of Nina sticking herself out, he retreated into the other room. It was only afterward that he closed the door tightly behind him. Nina started talking to Kathy. "Kathy, what's going on? Your son was kidnapped, and to raise the money for the ransom, you need to sell the apartment." "Who suggested that?" "Alex," Kathy answered quietly. "Strange why I'm not surprised. He offered to sell the apartment, but he didn't offer to sell the car." "Yeah, of course not. It's registered to him. You still don't find his behavior odd?" "Not as strange as it seems. I didn't tell you this, but I've been doubting him for a while now. We even put in an ad to sell the car, and then this and this. But I don't think he could steal Thomas. Is he really that sneaky? I mean, who knows? I'm not sure about anything anymore. I can't think about anything but my son. And I know that even if Alex is involved, I'll give them all the money they ask for. Everything I have, just so they can bring my boy back to me alive and unharmed. I've dashed so many times to call the police, but I'm scared, Nike, I'm scared." Ta looked at her friend with pity. She understood her. She wouldn't call the police herself, because it's scary to make a mistake and jeopardize a little boy's life. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Robert looked around, as if he hadn't forgotten anything. Suitcases stowed, all bridges burned, no way back, and a one-way ticket bought. Last day in Washington. Tomorrow, he leaves for permanent residence in Germany. This decision, of course, came hard to him. But after seeing Kathy with the man, he realized there was nothing holding him here anymore. The only thing he longed for before he left was to see Kathy one last time with his son. But to his great regret, he was unable to do so. For several hours he had lingered near the playground where they usually walked, but for some reason no one had shown up. Robert sighed heavily. The tickets were for tomorrow. Robert sighed heavily. There was a feeling of wrongness or a wrong decision. Well, what else could he do? Stay, try to get back into their lives? As if she was perfectly happy being a man again right now. Robert had caused her enough pain as it was. It wasn't worth disturbing her again. He didn't know how to spend his last day in the city. But then his phone rang from an unknown number, and the woman's voice in the receiver sounded familiar. But Robert didn't recognize it until the caller introduced herself. "I'm Nana, Kathy's friend. I realize it's stupid to call you, because you're far away and you can't help me." Robert Pitty's heart was troubled by the woman's voice, and it was clear that the news was not good. But he interrupted her. "I'm going to Washington." "What happened?" "Something with Kathy?" Nina suddenly fell silent. The woman hadn't expected Robert to be in Washington and had called him for advice. Although she realized Kathy would object, so be it. Nina couldn't just sit back and wait when her godson was in danger. Kathy's not thinking straight right now. She looks like a somnambulist. They had a suspicion that Alex was drugging her friend with some powerful sedatives so that she would act on his orders. Robert is not, in fact, a stranger. He is Thomas's father and, in Nina's opinion, had a right to know everything. When Robert was beginning to lose patience with the pause in the phone, Nina's congestion happened only not with Kathy. "With Thomas, I can't tell you everything over the phone. Come to my place, memorize the address." And when Robert hung up the phone, he felt like he was suffocating, as if time had suddenly reversed and he was back there, to the bedside of his dying daughter. He was feeling the same sensation now. It was exactly what he feared when he decided not to have any more children. To feel the pain and helplessness of losing his child again and not being able to do anything about it. The man huffed, looked around, and caught a glimpse of his reflection in the mirror. His lost, faded look. What on earth is this? He doesn't know anything yet about what happened to Thomas. "I've got to pack up and get the books right away. No, I'm not losing this baby. That's the only thing I'm going to fight for, whatever happens there," Robert thought and started to call a cab. Alex, however, looked at Kathy, settled to one point, and sat unmoving. She was sitting at the kitchen table, clasping a frozen glass of tea between her palms. The woman had long since forgotten about him and sat immersed in herself as if in a trance. Nina was not mistaken. There was a reason her friend had been acting so strangely the last few days. Alex, however, gave her a lot of sedatives. The woman became inhibited after them, but so she succumbed to his compulsion more easily. He insisted on waiting, and she patiently waited and waited for the main event in her life. For the moment, she had to take an evening call from an unknown caller, hoping to hear her son's voice in the receiver. She begged for its mechanical voice, rash her threats every night. And finally, the kidnappers took pity. Now she was allowed to hear a few short words from her son. "Mommy, take me away." That's what Kathy heard. Then the kidnapper took the receiver away from him, and the conversation was usually over. But Thomas's bitter cry, bursting out with words whenever he was allowed to talk to his mother, was always in Kathy's ears. Alex's deal to sell the apartment was dragging on. There were unforeseen complications, and it became clear that he would not be able to sell the apartment in a week. Kathy had acquaintances who could help him with registration and discharge. Alex did not go into details. The main thing for him was to know that the case was progressing. When it became clear that the apartment would not sell quickly, Kathy, having waited for the kidnapper's call, tearfully begged for more time, explaining why this was happening. And the kidnappers came through for her again. Of course they did. How could they not? Because Alex talked to Jenna beforehand, warned her about the sale. The man was scared, and he suggested to his wife to take the money that Kathy had on the account and not to wait for the sale of the apartment. But Jenna had gotten the taste for it, and the money didn't seem to be enough. She wanted it all, although I'm a psychologist. And about Thomas, who, as she expressed it, but does not stop asking for his mother, no one looked at her rented apartment. The apartment was paid in advance, and the neighbors knew that it was rented by a woman with 2 children. So they would not be surprised by the crying from there. But this crying irritated the light itself. In one of her phone conversations with her husband, she said she had found a way to tame it. Alex suspected that Jenna was beating the baby, but he didn't care. The main thing was not to draw attention to herself, so the neighbors wouldn't suspect anything. Frozen. Me with a glass of tea in my hands. Kathy had set it down on the table when, lying on the table, the phone suddenly rang. She knew it couldn't have been the kidnappers. They called in the evenings, and now it was morning. And glancing at the screen, Kathy was convinced of that. It was Nina. The woman spoke to her briefly and hung up, saying, "Okay, I'll be right there." "Where are you going?" Alex was worried. "Nina asked me to come to her." "Why?" "You know that the kidnappers are watching us. Maybe we shouldn't go out unnecessarily." "But if they are, They'll know I'm going to my friend's house. She's withdrawn all her savings and wants to give them to me." Kathy, though a little, rose resolutely from the table, putting the untouched glass of tea on it. "Nina asked me to come alone, so I'll probably call a cab. I'm afraid to drive myself. I think you know what I mean." "What kind of nonsense is that?" Alex exclaimed. "Why do you have to take a cab when we have a car? And why is it, let me ask you, that Nina wants you to come alone? But I think you know she doesn't like you very much, but she doesn't hide it." "Oh, you'd think I'd like her." Disgruntled, he muttered. "But there's no need to call a cab anyway. I'll drive you and stay in the car. I won't go in to see her." "But if that's the case, then well, let's go reconciliatory," smiled Kathy. When Alex drove Kathy to Nina's house and stayed waiting for her in the car, his anxiety subsided little by little. But what's the big deal? His best friend wants to help give the money that is so desperately needed right now. Will most likely give away everything she has. That makes sense. After all, Nina is also attached to that snotty, not a number. The man was sure he wouldn't make any sudden moves like calling the police. She is as afraid as Kathy of making an irreparable mistake. And Kathy, developing in the hallway, noticed that her friend was very nervous for some reason. Walking into the room, she immediately realized what the reason was. Robert was there. He had jumped out of his seat at the sight of Kathy and now stood looking at her silently. Kathy turned around abruptly and looked at her friend, who was shifting from foot to foot behind her. "Nina, what is this? Why did you tell him everything you did?" All her congestion from taking the drug instantly flew off Kathy. She was shaken all over by Robert's presence and the act done without his knowledge. Though she felt a little guilty about it, she immediately raised her voice too. "Yes, I called Robert and called him and told him everything, because I think he has a right to know, and so does his son." His son. As far as he was concerned, Robert didn't want to know. Kathy came from them and tried not to even look in the direction of the silently standing spouse. "He didn't need us. He left us. He doesn't care." "No, he does care." Nina argued with her, "and he is not a stranger to you." The woman lowered her voice and continued much more quietly. "I know Kathy. I saw him in the hospital when you were in labor. He was there until the end. I didn't tell you that, but I know for a fact a man can't be so worried if he doesn't care." Kathy came into the conversation. "Robert, our disagreement with you is not that important right now. What's more important is finding Thomas and bringing him back." "Thomas," Kathy whispered. "Do you know Thomas? He's your son, and you've never even met him." "I have." Robert lowered his head and continued without looking Kathy in the eye. "I've seen you a few times, watched you when you were walking in the yard. But I didn't come over, afraid to disturb you, because I didn't know what I really wanted. Now, so you know," the man grinned bitterly. "Yes, I do. The moment I saw you with another man, I was sure of what I wanted. That's when I realized I was too late. I don't know why I thought I could get you back at any moment. I'm sorry, Kathy, I was wrong. I was afraid to live, to really live, afraid of pain. What am I feeling now? It's fear for my child. You know I've already suffered a great loss, but now I realize there is no life without suffering. No life without you, and without my son." Kathy couldn't take it anymore, she cried. "Robert, everything you're saying right now doesn't matter to me. The only thing I want is Thomas back. That's all I've been living for the last few days. I'm afraid, terribly afraid of making a mistake and losing him forever. That's what you're planning to do. If you're gonna call the police, then no. I'm not gonna let you do that because I'm scared. But I've already realized that. But Nina told me that you suspect that you're his Alex. What do you think about that?" "Yes, we do. And the further we go, the more so. Alex is behaving very strangely, watching my every move, checking up on my account, how much money I have, how much my apartment is worth, fussing about selling it. And I would even say more than me, and I'm an idiot. I know that. Letting a stranger in without looking at him, without recognizing him. You could say I didn't care. I so desperately wanted to forget." Kathy cast a fleeting glance at Robert and continued in a near whisper, "to forget you." At those words, Robert stepped toward her and enveloped her in a hug. She clung to him with her whole body, clinging to him as if he were a solid bulwark. Confidence. And Robert said in a voice hoarse with excitement, "Kathy, you're not a fool, I'm a fool. If I hadn't left you, none of this would have happened. But I'll make it right. We'll get our son back, I promise, and I'll do anything for it." And when Kathy came out of the driveway an hour later, Alex was finishing his phone call. "No, I'm telling you, I can't show you the car right now." She hurricaned through it, checking all the faucets. As she did so, the grandmother looked at the two children playing in the only room and another crying. The younger boy bent over a bowl of porridge in the kitchen. With that, Grandma left the apartment, nudging the recovering Jenna in the back. "Are you sure? I'm not leaking anything. What a mess I'm in." Even though Jenna was angry, she didn't see anything suspicious in the neighbor's visit. And the grandmother went downstairs and held out her palm to Robert, who was standing there. "Give me the money." "I watched everything in the apartment of a woman and 3 children." "You're not wrong. There's definitely 3, definitely a girl and 2 boys. One's just a little kid." This Robert showed the grandmother a picture of her son on the screen of his phone. The old woman looked at the screen carefully. "I can't see very well without my glasses, but it looks like him." Yeah, that's him." Robert jumped out of the doorway, greedily gulping air with his mouth. How had it all turned out so fast? He found him, found his son. More than anything in the world, he wanted now to burst into that apartment and rip Thomas out of this Jenna's hands. But he was a little scared. What if she saw him and did something to hurt the child? The man had promised Martin to report all his actions, so he found the strength to call a friend first on hearing the news, and the latter told Robert not to do anything, but to wait until he arrived at the scene supercilly. "But I can't wait," Robert exclaimed. "When else are you going to get here? I'll go right now and get my son." You can't do that." Robert came to his senses. "We're going to get there real fast, even if you succeed, and you take that woman's baby away from her. Then Jenna will run off with Alex, and we won't be able to prove anything. You want the criminals to go unpunished." She also told Kathy not to say anything yet. "No way, you hear me?" She would give away her joy in front of Alex. And Jenna was very surprised when only half an hour after the neighbor's visit, the bell rang again in her apartment. Looking through the peephole, she saw the same old woman living downstairs. With irritation, the woman opened the door at the same time swearing, "What more do you want from me?" But she had no time to do anything, as uniformed men burst into the apartment, pressed her face against the wall, and handcuffs clicked on her hands. The last to run into the apartment was a tall, black-haired man in civilian clothes. He rushed over to the frightened and huddled Muzat in Thomas's corner and grabbed him in his arms. The boy was crying, and the man kept stroking his head and repeating, "Don't be afraid. It's over. I'm your daddy, you hear me? I'm daddy. I'm taking you to mommy." Martin approached the woman facing the wall. Svetlana removed the handcuffs from the woman and shoved her own phone, found on the table, into her hands. "Call your husband. Tell him to come here immediately." Without explaining anything, Jenna was pale, her eyes remained dry. "My children." She pointed her hand in the direction of the frightened boy and girl. "They are scared. Can I go to them?" "So you feel sorry for your own children, but you can bully other people's children." Martin grinned. "I will allow you to calm the children only after you call your husband here. Make up a good reason and tell him to come right away." Jenna helplessly took the phone in her hands and dialed her husband. "Alex, come right away. Something has happened with Thomas. I can't tell you everything over the phone." Yes, hurry, right now." When Alex ran into Jenna's apartment, he had no time to see anything, because right in the hallway he was met with a blow to the face. Robert hit him furiously, all the while repeating, "This is for my son, and this is for my wife." A young guy from the task force rushed to pull Robert away, but Martin stopped him with the words, "Don't. Wait, he's entitled to it. That scumbag is getting what he deserves." And the happy Kathy did not come down from the hands of her son, who paid for it himself with his little arms around her neck and could not tear himself away from his mom. At this picture, Robert looked on with a happy smile. He appeared on the doorstep with his son in his arms, Some time after Alex jumped out after an incomprehensible phone call, mumbled something inaudible to Kathy. "Thank you," the woman whispered, peering out from behind the child's shoulder. "Thank you, Robert. You're welcome." "Thank you to me," Robert replied. "I did what any father in my position would have done. And if I had been a good father, I would have been there for you from the beginning and wouldn't have let anything like this happen. Kathy, will you let me stay with you?" "Forever," again the woman asked in a whisper. "Forever," Robert replied. Kathy continued to hold her son with one hand and held out the other to the man. He stepped quickly, enclosing his family in an embrace. For a long time they still stood, embraced, the three of them. Family. The next day, Kathy and Robert went to the police station. There, Kathy, under the guidance of Martin, wrote a report of child abduction. And as she finished writing, the woman looked up at her spouse's friend. "And what will happen to them now?" "With Alex and his wife, they'll go to jail. Of course they'll go to jail. They'll go to jail. I promise you that. They'll go to jail for the maximum time allowed under this article. Alex, it's not clear with Jenna right now. Maybe she'll get a reprieve until the kids grow up. But I'll do my best to make sure that doesn't happen. What's going to happen to the kids? Where are they going to go? And if Jenna goes down, do they go to an orphanage? No, they won't." This Jenna turned out to be a pretty young mom. She got the call, and she's on her way to take the kids in. But if you look at it this way, when the grandmother raised her daughter in her own image, maybe the kids would have been better off in an orphanage. Who knows?
Subscribe and click the bell.
As a child, Camille was considered strange in the yard because she was not afraid of the dentist. When other children were being dragged into the dentist's office by their parents, hysterical and red-faced from crying, Camille was eager to peer through the narrow slit in the door and get a glimpse of what was going on. She was not afraid during dental treatment. Maybe because she didn't eat a lot of sweets, or maybe because everything that was going on aroused the girl's keen interest. She followed every movement of the doctors and afterwards asked 1,000,000 questions, flapping her naive, childish eyes. The sound of the machine, the miracles of solidifying fillings, white coats. It was all a special world for 8-year-old Camille. It was no surprise to anyone that upon graduation from high school, the girl firmly decided to become a dentist. All high school, she prepared diligently, learned chemical formulas, and diligently solved biology tests. Sometimes Camille put on a white coat at home, a cap, and imagined how to conduct the reception of patients. She had once borrowed it from a neighbor who worked as a pediatrician at the local clinic. "And why do you want to pick the teeth of other people's uncles and aunts, Camille?" Her mother sighed, stirring the soup in the pot. "Well, you want to teach capricious children." "Flipping through a book," answered the daughter. "It seems that you went to your grandmother." The woman grinned. "Only she was a veterinarian, and you decided to get to people." Camille grinned understandingly. Kathy's grandmother had worked as a zoo technician in the village for a long time, until she retired. And even afterward, at the director's request, she often came to check on the condition of the animals and deliver cows in difficult labor. At the same time, Grandma was not shy to cover young graduates of the Veterinary Institute who had just arrived at the farm and did not even know that it was dangerous to approach the cows and horses from behind. When the farm was disbanded, strong on her word, the elderly woman continued to be called by the locals. So, as long as there were at least a couple of cows in the village, there was plenty of work. Kathy lived where she had worked half her life, in a backwoods village. Camille's mom, Miranda, took a different path. She didn't want to live in the village and went to the city, hoping to fit into the new environment and achieve a title higher than honorary milkmaid. However, the city did not treat Miranda as favorably as she would have liked. The woman did not advance beyond elementary school teacher. but she received a small one-room apartment for her length of service, the kind of apartment where the kitchen is already cramped for 2 people. Camille was born and raised there. No matter how cozy it was under the wing of her mother, but since 15 years the girl thought about living separately. But where to? The modest salary of a teacher did not allow such a luxury. Her father stayed with them for a short time. Like many truckers, he lived for 2 families, of which neither of them knew. In the end, the man simply did not return from another trip. The mother waited 6 months and then, gathering her courage, filed for a unilateral divorce. Camille was secretly sad. She loved her father, and she missed his care, advice, and experience. However, her mother did not start any new relationships after such an outburst. She lived with her work and her daughter. The final exams came, followed by vacations. And now Camille stood in front of the doors of the medical school, struggling with shyness to enter. She had passed by countless times, dreaming of how she would get her student card and credit. But now the familiar outer walls seemed harsh, pressuring, even though the fulfillment of her dream depended on them. It felt strange. "You're not a sophomore." Someone touched her elbow. Camille turned around and saw a blonde girl with a pointy nose and oddly age-inappropriate brightly colored hairpins. I think she was a sophomore. Camille opened her student ID. "Yeah, sophomore year." "Cool." The stranger glowed and clapped Camille on the shoulder a little too suddenly. "At last you found someone. My name is Clara, by the way." "Camille, let's go find our group and office." Gradually, Camille and Clara became friends to such an extent that even their teachers began to call them an inseparable couple. The calm, reserved Camille and the volcanic Clara. Studying was not easy. Camille was warned about it by both teachers at school and her mother. Medicine does not tolerate amateurs and students. From the very first year of study, they persecuted mercilessly. Sometimes Camille fell asleep over her notes. Head puffy from the incredible amount of information learned, early rising, and the long road to the institute too exhausted. But the main thing was that her childhood dream, albeit slowly, but approached her. Clara did not strain herself so much. She often read magazines in her classes. She could oversleep and in general perceived going to the institute only as an excuse to dress up. "They'll expel you after the first session." Sometimes Camille would say to her careless friend, "Oh, I just need this crust for a beautician." Clara waved it off. "But to get it you have to pass your exams with at least a C." Camille stopped her. "I have enough knowledge for a C," confidently declared the village fashionista. In fact, Clara was not so lazy. She just had a different world view. Instead of studying every day, she preferred to stay up the night before the seminar to answer before forgetting what she had read. She took notes from her neighbors and used textbooks and manuals to prop up the wobbly table in her room. She was not a lazy Clara, and because she immediately began to look for some part-time jobs, or rather, they found it themselves, to hand out flyers at the dormitory or something to take somewhere for a small fee. So, by the end of the semester, she was invited to work evening shifts as a barista in a small coffee shop. She brewed coffee a little better than the cleaning lady, but she made eyes at all the visitors and smiled with 32 teeth. She left good tips, on which the girl bought cosmetics and new handbags. Rustic directness and simplicity pierced where the city was difficult. Clara was not afraid to look stupid, and it always played to her advantage. She had a goal, too, and the girl was going about it simply in her own way. Camille was always fun with Clara. She knew the latest gossip, had a lot of funny stories to tell. She could do her makeup in the bathroom before class. On one of the frosty days before the session, Camille stood at the bus stop in the morning, waiting for the bus, and a few other people crowded together with her. Time was running out, and the right bus was still missing. The grannies behind Camille were getting louder and louder. A man in an old-fashioned fur hat and a briefcase like an office worker finally couldn't stand it and asked the driver of the next bus where the number 14 had disappeared to. "They've all been written off." He shrugged indifferently. "Now you can only go to the center with transfers." Rumors that the bus would be liquidated had been circulating for a long time. But as it happens, everything happened at the most inopportune moment. The man in the fur hat cursed loudly, not embarrassing the passengers, and began to hurriedly call a cab. Camille realized that she would have to do the same in order not to be late. As luck would have it, the first class was a seminar with a very picky professor who wouldn't let latecomers in. To get to the institute, Camille gave away all her money, even scraped change from the farthest pockets. She ran into the auditorium a moment before the bell rang and, breathing loudly, flopped down on the bench next to Clara. "Where have you been?" "I was already thinking about how to get you out of school." She pounced on her friend with questions. "My bus doesn't run anymore," Camille complained, laying out her notebook. "I have no idea how to get there now. It's either a round trip across the city or a cab. So you move into my dorm. Clara's the one who yelled at me. 5 minutes and you're in school. Just remember to brush your teeth." Camille wanted to object, but suddenly realized that the idea is not so bad. And if it was a choice between her getting up an hour earlier and an expensive cab, Clara and the hostel won either way. After all, she'd wanted to live on her own for a long time. Room fees were ridiculous for students. She spent more on commuting from home, and she could go to her mom's on weekends. My roommate had just moved out, so that, as they say, all the cards were stacked against each other. Clara theatrically raised her hands to the ceiling. "You'll write an application to the commandant, and they'll move you in quickly." Camille nodded. The time we spent on the road could be used for more useful purposes, studying, walking. We could get a good night's sleep. The commandant was a little nagged when she gave her papers. "What are you doing? She's a local. I have to settle in non-residence." The girl kept silent, knowing that she was obliged to settle in. The commandant once again looked at her with the look of a dog, wanting to bark at a passerby in case of something, but there was no such thing. In the end, she accepted the application and told her the date of settlement. We almost walked out of the dormitory. She squeezed Camille in her arms so tightly that she even squeaked. "Yay, yay, now we're together." The mother took the news of her daughter's future move with enthusiasm. The apartment was cozy, but cramped, and this fact, alas, did not change even motherly love. Did not eat there only all kinds of nasty things. Miranda admonished her daughter, putting towels and a new set of bed linen in her bag, and "Don't drink at my place." She expressively, but rather jokingly, threatened with her fist. "Or this Clara, your friend, Wendy, will start to influence you badly." The woman continued, "Mom, she's fine." Camille defended her friend. "She's just peculiar." A few days later, on her day off, she arrived at the dormitory with her things. Clara was already waiting for her, helped her bring everything in, helped her get settled, showed her where everything was. The room was small, but here Camille had her own separate bed, her own table, a closet, a shelf, and a whole wall. All in all, it wasn't too bad. The main thing was that it was a couple minutes from the university, and the rest would get used to it. In the evening of the same day, Camille and Clara were walking down the corridor, and suddenly they were called. "Hello, girls." A student peeked out of a nearby room. "Hi, Michael." Clara turned around and tilted her head to the side, like a magpie looking at a shiny bauble. "What do you want?" "Come join us. We lack female company." The guy waved his hand invitingly. "We'll feed you, we'll make you drunk. We won't leave you offended. We're celebrating a birthday, after all." Camille tugged Clara's elbow questioningly. "It's Michael from third year, who's been after me since the beginning of the semester," she whispered back. "He's not bad, but he's a bit stupid. And you want to go?" Camille took another look at the boy who was persistently beckoning them to come along. "Why not?" Clara looked puzzled and looked at her. "Tomorrow is Sunday anyway. There's no need to go anywhere. We'll sit and chat. We're all friends. There's nothing to be afraid of." She turned to Michael. "Okay, we'll be there soon." "Wait." The guy glowered, gave them a thumbs up, and disappeared into the room. Camille hesitated for a moment, but then she thought about it. She hadn't really made friends with anyone except Clara in 6 months of school. Of course, she talked to her classmates, but it wasn't the same, and her old school friends visited less and less often and wrote shorter and shorter letters. They all had their own worries, and they didn't understand why she had to go to an institute on the other side of town. Clara quickly combed her hair, changed from pants to jeans, and found a decent t-shirt in the closet. Camille didn't bother with that. She just pinned her hair up. There were 3 guys and a girl in the room, apparently the couple of the birthday boy, tall, thin, but very hospitable. The old acquaintance greeted the girls and introduced the company. "This is Liam, the birthday boy, and his lady Cindy. This is John, the future of urban medicine. And this," Michael jabbed his finger at the guy sitting on a chair by the window, "Robert from the journalism department." The girls were welcomed and seated at a common table. After a while, the shyness of acquaintance evaporated without a trace. Everyone was drinking, eating, and joking. Cindy suggested playing crocodile. The boys readily moved the beds to make room. Camille stared blankly at all the new acquaintances. Michael was chatting with Clara, and it was obvious that he liked her. He was trying to lift her up, picking invisible crumbs off her shoulder, scratching the back of her head. Liam and Cindy had been together for a long time. It was evident in their communication and warmth toward each other. Camille even had a note of distant jealousy running through her mind. She'd dated a guy in high school, but he'd never treated her with the care and warmth these two had for each other. John made occasional jokes about doctors during breaks when his mouth wasn't full of food. He'd already put a couple ketchup stains on his shirt, but would that stop a man with a big appetite? Robert was the only one Michael introduced differently than the others. He didn't fit at the table. He sat by the window with a plate in his hands, but that didn't stop the young man from collecting all the stares. He told stories, joked, asked provocative questions, and posed picturesquely. "Robert's a blabbermouth," said Liam. "He chose his profession just to scratch his tongue. It's better to scratch your tongue than to pick at people." The student journalist theatrically grimaced, which immediately caused laughter of the company. "And what's wrong with helping people?" Camille suddenly asked. Everyone fell silent and stared at her with interest. Robert himself looked at the guest. "Well, you are not going to help them for free, are you? Or are you going to open a branch of the Mother Teresa Society?" He sarcastically teased Camille. "I want to help. First of all, I go into the profession at the call of my heart, not because it is profitable," parried the girl. "And you need to eat, so stop covering your ambition with charity." Robert waved his hand at her. Sooner or later, people will become just a means of earning money for you. But some people will earn money by talking, and others will see rotten teeth and other unpleasant things in the human body. Robert, enough of this argument you've been having with us for 3 years. All professions are needed, and all have their talents. Liam said conciliatingly, "Let's have a drink and play cards." Camille looked at Robert with an annoyed look, but did not argue further, so as not to offend the birthday boy. The trouble was, she liked the smug talker. Robert had a typical smarmy appearance, chiseled facial features, dark hair, strong charisma, and a sharp mind. Gradually, the angular conversation lubricated and the tension it had created went away. The party had passed 0 o'clock when there was a knock on the door. "Quiet," Liam hissed. "The commandant has arrived." Before Camille knew it, the table was covered with a sheet. Cindy and Jonah were hidden under one bed, Clara and Michael under another, and she and Robert were shoved into the closet. Everything happened so fast that hardly a fly could have flown in that time. The commandant's voice was heard, reprimanding Liam in a half-toned voice for the noise and mess after lights out, and the latter was making every effort to demonstrate the supposedly empty room. And so it was every time. Robert sighed, Camille over his ear. "He's hiding us in closets, the idiot." The closet was cramped. Camille felt her back against the guy's chest and almost stepped on his feet. For some reason, her cheeks were flaming and her tongue was lolling. Robert gingerly touched her shoulder, as much as it was possible to do while standing in a closet full of clothes. "I'm sorry, okay? It's just nature's way of picking things apart. That was rude." Without turning around, Camille replied. She could feel the guy's guilt. Was he guilty? Breathing on the back of her neck, it was getting stuffy. "Let's go out tomorrow as an apology. Pick your own place." Robert put his hand on her forearm. The commandant let go of the last nagging remark, wagged her finger at Liam, and made to leave. Goosebumps ran up and down her body. It was hot and cold at the same time. There was tension in the air again, but lingering, enveloping. "Come on," Camille agreed. To the exhibition of modern artists in the gallery. "All right, I'll be waiting outside the dormitory at 5. The closet doors swung open. "Why haven't you two had a fight?" Liam laughed. "Almost." Robert was the first to jump out and winked at Camille. "You all right?" "Why did they put you and that ashhole in there?" Clara clucked, giving the guy a stare. "I think we're going on a date with that ashhole." Camille whispered quietly, trying to hide her red cheeks and the stupid love sparkle in her eyes. "Camille, you have golden hands." The grateful patient smiled goodbye and left the office. Camille took off her gloves and nodded to herself in the mirror. It was for moments like this that she had gone to the dentist's office. For grateful looks and sincere appreciation. And she didn't regret the years she'd spent studying. First 5 years in medical school, then residency for another 3 years. Paperwork for the registrar's office, a robe to take home to wash, so what else? Call Clara. They were supposed to meet today for a professional holiday. Camille threw on her coat, said goodbye to the girls at the reception desk, and hurried to the store for a cake. Clara still had a sweet tooth from the university. No one was home yet. Robert warned that he would be at the agency until the evening. While he was still studying, he started working part-time there. 7 years later, he took the editor's chair himself. But Robert had connections with every authority in the city, from vegetable stalls to the prosecutor's office. They got married while still at the institute, a year after they started their relationship and that meeting in the dormitory. Clara had convinced her that Robert was good, of course, but that he liked to show off. Her mother didn't take the profession of journalism seriously. What kind of work is it? Collecting gossip? Like plowing or sowing grain in a factory. That's a job. That's a job. When Camille came to visit on weekends and raved about her boyfriend, Robert was not what he seemed at first glance, and not what everyone else saw him as. He knew how to be caring and delicate, and even restrained his desire to pick everything to the bone. At the same time remained the soul of the company, Noisy Lighter. Many girls openly envied Camille, frankly looked at Robert when they appeared at the Institute. "There's nothing to see here," Clara waved her hands at them. "They're not here for the ballet." Although she was initially against the relationship between Camille and Robert, she soon became an ardent defender of their peace of mind and was even a bridesmaid at the wedding. Not without pride, informing the guests that without her the young people would not have met. It might have seemed that Clara had nothing better to do. But how wrong were those who thought so? Village fashionista had affairs with 2, 3 at a time, never bored in the evenings, sometimes choosing from several candidates, and was not shy to use her natural beauty. Those problems that she herself did not want to solve were solved by suitors. That's how she finished her studies, not really knowing what she was studying for. She got her medical degree as a working makeup artist. She didn't go to any residency program, and sat in a beauty studio, having mastered in addition to makeup and hair and other beauty procedures. From boredom or windiness, married and 6 months later divorced. A year more fluttered on dates and married again. Clara wasn't lazy. She was just lucky. And she was never shy about doing things that others disapproved of. That's why she won where others stopped. Camille sometimes thought that her road was straight and quiet, where you could see all the stops and bumps for miles ahead. Clara's road wiggled like a snake and went into potholes or under clouds. The important thing was that eventually they both ended up with a destination. The tea was getting cold. Camille was already thinking of calling her friend, who was almost an hour late, when she heard a commotion in the entryway and a call. "Can you imagine the client was late? She delayed me. And then the cab was still running." Clara started to get indignant. Camille just smiled. They hugged. It couldn't have been otherwise. Over the years, Slava had changed from a country girl with ambition into a cold city beauty. She cut her hair in a bob, always wore makeup and fashionably dressed. And she was more concerned with a new skirt and going for a massage than having groceries at home. "Oh, you're cooking, I see." Clara had barely made it into the kitchen and immediately stuck her nose into the pots on the stove and into the refrigerator. And borscht, and stuffed cabbage, and compote. Camille did not chase brands and hairstyles. She dressed minimalistically and simply. But she knew how to create coziness and keep up with everything. "William nags me for not cooking." Clara complained. Everyone has their own talents. Camille calmed her down by pouring tea. The friendly chat went on late into the night. It was always like this when they met. The cake was almost over and Camille was making coffee for the 3rd time. When Robert finally came home, the young editor was disheveled and twitchy. He came into the kitchen, said hello briefly, hugged his wife, and retired to his room, saying he had had a hard day. "Why is he so sour?" asked Clara, glancing at the man. "Tired, I guess." Camille shrugged her shoulders. "You can't force him to sit down at the table." Come on, come on." Clara jumped up from her chair and reached for her friend's shoulder. "What is this?" She picked up a red hair with 2 long fingernails and showed it to the surprised Camille. "Ah," she mewed in surprise. "Maybe it was accidentally blown in?" "Yeah, say it was blown in by the wind." Clara stared at her with her hands at her sides. I'm a friend of the men, know them like a peel. Came tired in other people's hair, just worked hard, poor guy. What are you implying that he? Camille moved into the room. I'm not implying anything yet, but I have the fact on my fingers. Clara shrugged her shoulders. We need to watch him. Think of something strange going on. Camille thought for a moment. Her friend's suspicion had shifted the bricks of her inner fortress just a little, but it was enough to make the structure shake just a little. Robert replaced Camille, and the father she had been deprived of became both friend and husband at once. The first years they lived, soul to soul, understood each other without words, and as if the whole universe was formed in the merger of two dissimilar characters. Then they experienced several crises. Quarrels were like everyone else's, but they quickly became the past. The last year they lived a very measured relationship, but loaded professionally. Both worked hard to achieve their goals. Maybe they've been socializing less. Is everything okay in bed? She was interrogated by Clara. Well, maybe because of the work we've been doing, we've been socializing a little less. Yes, Camille agreed. Why do you even bother? One hair and you're already panicking. Hair is where it all starts. Clara put her finger up authoritatively. I advise you to go through his pockets, sniff his shirts, and his laptop too. I'm not sniffing shirts. What kind of nonsense is that? Camille was indignant, although subconsciously doubts had already taken hold of her. Also, go to his workplace. Maybe they've got a red-haired trainee there. Clara said in a conspiratorial whisper. They chatted for a while, and Clara went home. Oh, I almost forgot. My salon will celebrate the anniversary of the opening. Come with Robert. You're my regular. At the cafe next week, Friday. We'll come, of course. Camille nodded. Smell the shirts, though. Clara winked, sent a kiss, and disappeared into the elevator. Unwillingly, Camille began to look at her husband. Before Clara's words, she had never thought of accusing him of infidelity. Of course, that fact was vaguely believable, but still. One evening, Camille went through her husband's things. God, what am I doing? She asked herself when she actually sniffed the collar of Robert's favorite shirt. It didn't smell suspicious, and there was no hair either. Camille calmed down and put Clara's words out of her mind. Clara is Clara, and her Robert is not like that. She had long ago accepted his job and the need to socialize with a bunch of people in a day. Not many people her husband could have had a meeting with. That's ridiculous. Robert, we're all right, aren't we? Camille asked on the way to the cafe. She didn't know why she had asked. The inner turmoil hadn't completely gone away. Robert turned to her. Yes, why are you asking all of a sudden? Why am I asking? Camille wondered. You can't tell me you found a hair. Lately you've been at work. We don't talk much. She stretched. But you know that I have a lot of things to do and responsibilities every day. Soon I'll take an assistant and relax a little. Robert smiled at her. Oh, here we are. Slaga was already waiting for them at the entrance, apparently tipsy and in full battle paint. She was friends with the owner of the salon and had even bought a small share of the business from her, so she could invite anyone to the party. Camille sometimes wondered where the careless Clara got the money for such a thing, but the mystery remained a mystery. The mini-corporate party was a lot of fun. The women's company was diluted by a few men. The owner's husband, a guy, a masseur, and the husbands of Camille and Clara. Camille, a friend's new husband, was hardly known to her. She had only seen him at the wedding and had little recollection of where he had come from. William looked frankly bored. Constantly attached to glasses with champagne, sighed, and very sluggishly participated in the general celebration. The hostess raffled off certificates for free treatments among the guests. Camille successfully won one of them and hurried to please her husband, who went outside for a smoke. She jumped out of the door and looked around puzzled. Only Clara was outside, talking on the phone. "Have you seen Robert?" her friend asked her. Clara put the phone away in her purse. "Camille, while you were participating in the raffle, your husband poured wine on his pants and went to change, and we got a delivery of new manicure tables. They're idiots. They got their days mixed up. I'm rushing to the salon to pick them up so I don't ruin the party. I'll be right back. Have fun." She jumped into a cab and drove away. Baffled, Camille called Robert. He confirmed that he had doused his pants, would change and be back soon. "Miss me?" She heard a voice from behind her. William came out of the door, Camille replied. No. They had said hello very crudely in the first few minutes. The girl wondered why her husband had not warned her and had left so hastily. "Let's have a talk or something." William kept up. "I don't know anyone here but you, and there's nothing to talk about with these women. They're all talking about manicures and new hair colors." He yawned tiredly and flicked his lighter. "Well, let's do it." Camille agreed, realizing she was in a similar situation. William asked about work and his habits, his studies. Only when he started to talk about himself. He complained about Clara, either explicitly or implicitly. Camille knew he was drunk, but for some reason she listened. She'd never talked to someone like that about her friend. It was as if she'd been given a glimpse into a secret suitcase. "She cooks once a week, and then some crap that's impossible to eat. I'm used to home cooking. My mom was a cook all her life." William sighed. "Here you work from morning till night. You want soup, cutlets, pies, and she buys salads or dumplings. Eat up, sweetheart." "Ah, but she puts on makeup for 3 hours. Why did you get married then?" Camille asked me carefully. "Changing to you. She's so beautiful, you can't take your eyes off her. When I first saw her, I was blinded, but now I realize that you can't eat beauty alone." William finished smoking, moved closer and whispered, "And I gave her money for a share in the salon, damn it. I thought at least she'd stop hanging around there herself and go home and earn an income. But she didn't." Camille suddenly felt sorry for William. She realized that his rose-colored glasses had shattered inside. On the one hand, he'd seen who he'd married. On the other hand, beauty always messes with a man's head. "I would like a wife like you, Camille, calm, responsible, domestic, who is ready to bring up children, not to paint chickens in front of the mirror." Suddenly William said, looking into her eyes. Camille staggered back and pulled her fingers out of William's palm, which he had already managed to grasp. "I don't think that's a good idea." The girl cut him off. "It's high time we went back inside." She turned and walked quickly into the cafe. Her heart was pounding frantically. There was bewilderment and shame in her head, ticking behind her ears. Camille sat down in her seat at the table and poured half a glass of wine. Should she tell Clara what had happened? William's complaints and his fatuous innuendos. She'd start questioning him. They'd have a fight. They'll have to discuss it all again. No, let them deal with their own problems and with each other. Camille drank her drink in one gulp and reached for a sandwich. For some reason, she felt sick to her stomach. She wanted to hug Robert, but he had disappeared. She called. Her husband answered that he was almost there, but he was stuck in traffic. Finally, he entered the cafe wearing jeans and a t-shirt. About 10 minutes later, Clara burst in, out of breath. desperately arguing on the phone with someone. What idiots! This is not a company, it's a silent horror. Clara rumbled, sitting down on a chair next to them. Not only did they show up on the wrong day, but they almost hurt me. She pointed to a barely visible bruise on her elbow and an abrasion on her forearm. I'm sorry it took so long, Camille. Robert hugged her from behind. It's crazy driving in this traffic. Why didn't you warn me? Asked Camille. I was standing in the middle of the hall, pardon me, with wet pants. I don't have time to talk. I hurried to the car and rushed to change my pants. Robert guiltily spread his hands apart. Next to him, Clara continued to make noise and resent him. Camille calmed down a little when she felt her husband's hand. At the other end of the table sat silent William and glared at her through the wall of a clear glass. A few days passed. Camille was finishing up her work at the clinic and her mood was good. The last 8-year-old patient had simply delighted her with his courage and resilience. He even hugged the doctor's aunt goodbye and under his mom's proud gaze, embarrassedly said, "Thank you." Of course, Camille could not just let the little hero out of the office and handed him a new toothbrush, which was left by the brand representative for promotional purposes. The young doctor had already said goodbye to all her colleagues and was standing at the door when the phone in her pocket rang. "Camille, help me out." Clara's voice sounded in the receiver. "Come, model? My student and I need to practice, and the model is sick." "Now?" Camille was surprised. "Yes, it's urgent," Clara begged. "Okay, I'll be right there." She hung up. Camille often helped her friend out. It was not difficult and pleasant, because afterwards she always came home with beautiful makeup and styling, and Clara's training was not disrupted. It took Camille about half an hour to get to the salon, and they were waiting for her. Seated in a chair and under the popular tracks of the radio air, Clara and her student began to work. The girlfriend was scattered in another gratitude and scolded the irresponsible student, a model who did not come. When the work was done and the student went home, Slaga offered Camille to stay and have a cup of coffee, and it turned out very well. Looking at the makeup, Clara said approvingly, "She's a smart girl, maybe something good will come out of her." Camille theatrically flapped her eyelashes, turned one side and then the other. At the same time, she caught a glimpse of the old manicure tables. Camille would not have confused them. She had been to Clara's office so many times that she had already memorized how the tables stood and on which one, how the light from the window fell. "Didn't you say your desks were going to be replaced?" She looked questioningly at her makeup artist friend. "Where are they?" "And they turned out to be defective. We sent them back." Waved her hand. "What, all at once?" Camille was puzzled. "Yes, they all have scratched countertops. I told you the movers were idiots, banging them against each other like crazy." Clara brushed the shadow off her friend's cheek with a brush. "They ruined our holiday and our nerves. Did they hit you with the tables too?" Camille nodded at the greenish bruise on the makeup artist's elbow. "Aha!" Clara didn't even look at her arm. "They opened the door as if it were their own house, and I was knocked for company." My friends had finished their coffee and had long ago switched to another topic when Clara, who was scrolling through the news feed on her phone, suddenly rushed in. "Camille, look." She shoved the phone with the photo open on the screen. The girl looked at the picture and was surprised. The photo was of the entire staff of the agency where Robert worked. The guys were holding some certificates in their hands. Apparently, another award from the big shots. But another thing was interesting. Next to Robert stood a young red-headed girl. "Aha!" shouted Clara triumphantly. "I told you so. I told you so." I told you so. Camille said, looking at the photograph. She felt sick to her stomach. The nasty feeling from the conversation with William and the running around at home from the discovery of the red hair came back again. It's all right, Camille. We'll expose him. Clara clenched her manicured fingers into a fist. If anything, you'll be the first to file for divorce. What divorce, Clara? Camille jumped up, her cheeks flaming. It's not clear yet. It's clear as day, dear friend. She folded her arms authoritatively across her chest. Your Robert's gone rogue. We gotta go in there and rip that redhead's hair out. Okay. Camille put her hands on her temples. I don't believe this nonsense. Okay, agreed Clara. Watch him very carefully this week. Men are always wrong about little things. I will. Camille nodded. She wanted to hint at William's behavior, but didn't. A fence could make a mess of things. Besides, Clara was just drawing her own conclusions, a little obsessive, but for now there was no one to take offense at, and nothing to take offense for. Robert was behaving normally. Camille, attuned to Clara's confidence, began to covertly follow her husband, something she usually never did. Until that day, Camille had thought that there was no point in restricting her partner's freedom, forbidding something, scandals or jealousy scenes. She had realized this when she was still a student, although she loved Robert very much. She admired him as a man, as a human being. The more controlling, the more likely the opposite effect. And to arrange emotional swings with a choleric sanguine like her husband is a noisy and dangerous task. Scenes and emotions to him enough at work, at home wanted peace. He said so himself. During the day, the young editor, like a chameleon, adjusted to anyone who got to his office, and in the evening at home, wanted to be himself. Feeling like a failing schoolgirl, Camille rummaged through her husband's backpack, his notebook while he was in the shower. On the pages of the notebook, she found a list of phone numbers and women's names. In his jacket pocket, a strange pink-colored pen. Her heart pounded loudly, thudding in her ears as if it had been covered with a bucket. Camille, what are you doing? Robert stood in the doorway, looking at his wife in amazement. The girl froze with the evidence in her hands. Are you accusing me of something? The man folded his arms across his chest. What is it? Camille jabbed her finger at the list of numbers. These are the candidates for the assistant position. The husband shrugged indifferently. I interviewed them last week and put them all here. Why? Did you use this? Camille waved a pink, girlish pen in the air. First my own, then I ran out of paste, and Kelly lent me her writing utensils. What's the problem? Why are you going through my stuff? Robert glanced around at the slight mess on the desk. Nostrils dilating, Camille felt like a fool. She replied something, and under her nose, she slipped the notebook and pen to her husband and went into the kitchen. His explanations were very convincing, but the worm of paranoia continued to gnaw its way through her thoughts. Camille crushed her whiskey with her hands and sat down at the table in the kitchen. She grabbed her phone and texted Clara about what had happened. The makeup artist didn't believe her friend's husband's excuses and offered to follow up with him to be sure. Camille looked at her schedule, figured something out, and texted back, "Go ahead." Camille went to bed late. Robert was already on his 10th dream when she finally settled down. Before that, she stared at her sleeping husband's face for a long time, trying to find answers to the questions that tormented her. In the morning, she pulled herself together, pretended that nothing had happened, walked Robert to work, and waited for Clara. Her friend arrived just as Robert drove out of the yard. "You ready?" Clara's voice was filled with an ill-concealed excitement, as if she'd been waiting a long time for permission. "Do I have a choice?" Camille looked at her, buckling her seatbelt in the car. "Well, you might not like what you see, if you see anything," corrected Clara, shrugging her shoulders. "But it would be better not to see anything, of course. He's gotten kind of aloof." Camille murmured as they caught up with Robert on the road and pulled a few cars farther away. He seemed fine, but something was wrong. That's how it starts. Clara nodded, gazing down the road. First they get cold, and then they start lying. Our feminine instincts can't be fooled. Did your previous husband cheat on you? Camille suddenly blurted out for some reason. Clara jerked faintly at the wheel, so surprised by the question. Sebastian? Maybe he cheated, very probably. She threw it back vaguely, but I didn't care anymore. I went on a date. I realized I was sick of Sebastian. I felt sorry for him. I didn't tell him, and when I got sick of him, I filed for divorce. Aren't you afraid William might cheat on you? Camille could barely contain her impulse to spill the truth. William? Please. Clara waved her hand and instantly relaxed. He's head over heels in love with me, like a doggy waiting for me at all times. Is so in love, she muttered under her breath, so that Clara wouldn't hear. They pulled into the parking lot near Robert's work. His car was already there. It was going to be a long ambush. Slava promptly ran to the nearest stall for coffee and buns. It took until lunchtime to doze off in the car. Slava nudged Camille in the shoulder as Robert came out of the agency together with the red-haired girl from the photo. They got into the car and got ready to drive out. "Let's go lovebirds. We'll get them now," Clara muttered excitedly, twisting the steering wheel. Camille watched her husband's car with bated breath. She recognized the girl from the photo. Robert had said it was his assistant, but was it just that? The answer to that question loomed somewhere on the horizon. The editor and her companion made a trip to the city utility office and the stationery store. On the whole, there were no provocative moments except for the opening of the door. The girl carried a folder with documents, sometimes asking Robert something or answering the phone. He himself almost never took his eyes off the phone, even while driving. "Yeah, does he hold the door for you?" Clara was smarting when she noticed a gesture of kindness from her friend's husband. "Almost always," Camille answered, following Robert with her eyes. "Listen, call him right now," suggested Clara. "Ask him what he's doing and see what he says." Camille dialed the number and waited. Robert's phone was busy, but he switched calls almost immediately and picked up. "Hi, did you pick up lunch?" She answered his reply. "No, I'll grab a bite in the cafeteria. Don't worry." In a completely calm voice, the husband replied. "All right," Camille sighed. "How was your day?" "I've been traveling for work." That was the answer. "Why are you calling?" "No reason." Camille sensed that her husband suspected something. "See you tonight, bye." Clara listened to the conversation with her arms folded across her chest. He didn't say he was traveling with a woman. She played with her eyebrows expressively. Hiding for sure. Her wooden confidence pierced the last shield of doubt in Camille's chest. Why the hell did he even need an assistant? Clara clasped her hands together. Somehow he'd been working on his own for 2 years and nothing. And now what? Suddenly the manager's ambition has taken over. I don't know. Camille was staring out the window. Tired, I guess. Yeah, from work or your wife? Clara snorted. Let's go home. Do you drink white or red? In the evening, Robert found 2 drunken girlfriends at home. Camille couldn't get Clara out for about an hour. She'd ask for a drink. She'd cuddle. She'd lose something in her bag. Finally, William arrived and took his exuberant wife himself. He cast a glance of interest and questioning glance at Camille, and they left. Now her husband seemed to Camille the best and most innocent. She fell dreamily asleep, hugging her pillow and whispering something to it with only her lips. Robert sat in the chair and waited for his spouse to fall asleep. He did not scold her, did not lecture her. He only set the alarm clock, put a couple of fizzy pills on the table, and put a glass of water on the table. Then he went out, hesitating on the threshold of the room as if in doubt. But the second confusion lasted only a moment. The man glanced at Camille, nodded to himself, and closed the bedroom door. Camille became nervous and jumpy. She began to be late for work, snapped at a patient who had traveled to her from across town for the first time. "Camille, why don't you take a vacation?" The receptionist at the desk asked sympathetically. "Maybe I will," replied the doctor, wrinkling her forehead tensely. She began to notice a cooling in her and Robert's relationship. Then he hugged her dryly, then forgot some usual little things, then dropped calls and called back himself. Camille remembered the way the other female students looked at him during their studies. Robert had always stood out. He was passionate, charismatic, had a great sense of humor and a sharp mind. Next to him, she, but felt sometimes that she did not reach. Over the years, Robert has not lost any of its appeal, even became even brighter. You have a salary today, go to the mall, buy yourself something, a dress, shoes, the mood will improve. Camille, my colleague, advised me sympathetically. It was a good idea. She had almost forgotten that it was the height of summer and that she didn't have to be self-conscious about jeans and simple t-shirts. Camille called Clara and suggested that they go shopping together after work, but her friend said she was busy and refused. At the mall, the windows were full of sales posters. Mannequins towered between the rows of clothes. Camille remembered what pants and styles of dresses she had been advised by Clara the day before and began to walk along the racks. After choosing a few options, she went to the fitting room. What a pleasant surprise! She heard behind her back when she came out to evaluate the outfit in the big mirror in front of the booths. Camille turned around and saw William. The man had come to the mall, apparently for the same reason she had, to update his closet. What a surprise! Camille muttered. "Hello, William. The dress fits perfectly." The boy gave her a thumbs up. "Don't hesitate to take it." This time he was fresh and had a positive attitude. The old memories that had come alive with his appearance slid unpleasantly down her back. "Camille, I wanted to apologize," William began, shyly putting his hands behind his head. "I got drunk in that cafe out of nerves and fatigue. I was talking nonsense. I'm sorry. I acted like a total asshole." Camille was surprised, pleasantly surprised. "Good, it happens. What are you doing here?" She glanced around the store as if confirming the question. "I closed a nerve-wracking deal at work, took a breather, and out of the bonus, decided to buy myself a long-time dream." William nodded at the package from the appliance store, and the new jeans were a bonus. Camille looked at the jeans appraisingly. "You take them too. Don't think twice." She smiled slightly. Even this sudden company in William's face was good for her for some reason. Maybe it distracted her from her obsessive thoughts. Maybe she needed a counselor, or maybe it was something else. Clara was busy working, and she wouldn't come with me, he said, as they left the store with their purchases. "Me too, busy for the day." Camille confirmed. "How about a coffee?" William suggested. "Or was there something else you wanted to buy?" Camille thought that the lingerie shopping would have to be postponed and nodded in agreement, approving the coffee idea. At the cafeteria cash register, she wanted to pay for it herself, but William was the first to do so and put a flavored drink and a small dessert in front of her. Camille hadn't ordered the latter. "Come on, as the husband of your best friend." William waved his hand. "We're almost related." Before he could say anything, he heard a text message from the bank. "Why?" William stared sorely at Camille, looking at the balance of the card. "Almost, but not related." The girl commented briefly. They chatted, then went back down to the shopping floors and wandered for a long time, picking out one pretty thing or another. Camille sensed that William was enjoying himself with her. He didn't turn on that whiner in the cafe anymore, but was cheerful and somehow relaxed, at the same time talking about all sorts of funny situations at work, reminiscing about old friends and years of study. There was even room for a story about William's country childhood and the fun vacations of a first grader. Listening to all this, Camille did the main thing, distracted herself from obsessive thoughts about her husband's love. It was time to get home. The time was nearing evening. Camille hailed a cab as they stood at the entrance to the mall. "Thanks for the shopping trip." Camille smiled as the car pulled up. "Thank you for the pleasant walk. Maybe we can do it again sometime." William opened the door of the cab for her. "It's probably not the right thing to do." Camille hesitated. William gave her a quick peck on the cheek and said, "Well, you're a big girl. It's time to prioritize what's right." Camille drove home dazed and outraged and flattered. She was a mixture of all the emotions of the last few days. Resentment toward her husband, worry about their private life, irritation, and into all of it sprinkled sparks of innuendo from William. It's not right. It's not nice that she's having coffee with her husband, her best friend's best friend, who is the second time he's made ambiguous hints to her. Why? Well, of course she knows why. She knows she loves Robert. She knows she values Clara as a friend and loved one, and she knows she's not ready to go along with what William is veiledly offering her. Everything is obvious and simple, but then why is she flattered by his attention? Is it not compensation for a grudge from Robert? How long had it been since he'd spent with her, almost half of his day off? The more Camille thought about it, the more the questions became, leading her into the wilderness or to an unpleasant crossroads. Tomorrow I talk to Robert straight, Camille decided, and tell Clara the truth about her husband. That would be the right prioritization. The next day, Camille had few patients, so she got off early after work. On the way, she received a call from a nervous Robert, who asked her to bring her work phone, which she had forgotten at home. On the way, she thought about the best words to say to her friend and her husband. She decided to start with the first one. She dialed Clara's number and proposed to meet in the evening. The makeup artist happily said in the phone about her agreement, and even asked if it was worth dressing up. "No, we'll just sit around," followed by a reply. Entering the apartment, Camille heard the trills of Robert's work phone. She picked it up from the mirror in the hallway and glanced at the screen. There were about 10 missed calls, and she was about to get into a cab when a message sent at about 1 o'clock in the morning caught her eye. "Missed you, my affectionate boss. Looking forward to tomorrow." Camille felt like she'd been splashed with cold water. Here it is. Her suspicions, here in her hands on her husband's phone screen. Tears came to her eyes. Her nose pinched and her throat was filled with rage and jealousy. Camille caught her own gaze in the rearview mirror and was stunned. She was looking at an angry and deceived woman, hungry for revenge and justice. All plans to talk to her husband were forgotten in a moment. "Warden, then," Camille hissed, clutching the phone so that it almost cracked. The cab driver involuntarily glanced at the passenger. He sensed with his spinal cord that something wrong was going on behind him. The only thing the girl managed to do before jealousy finally drowned her in its cauldron was to write down the number from which the text message had been sent. Camille burst into the agency office with flaming cheeks. The staff said hello to her, but the girl didn't hear. She yanked Robert's office door open, to the astonished stares, but it wouldn't budge. Robert's at lunch. A fellow journalism intern shyly spoke up, emerging from the right. He was the first to catch Camille's furious gaze. "We'll wait for him here." Camille glanced angrily at the empty chair of the assistant next to the office and sat down in her chair, tapping her fingers on the tabletop expectantly. The whole office stared at her, with a mixture of fear and bewilderment. Someone had apparently called Robert on the sly, and he came rushing in a couple minutes later. "Did you have a good meal, sweetheart?" Camille got up from her chair and angrily shoved his nose, the phone screen texting. At the same time, she glared angrily at Kelly, who was standing in the doorway behind the chief with a stack of papers. Camille? The girl felt that her claims were being ignored, that everyone was laughing at her in a voice that was not embarrassed. Why? Why did it say the word supervisor? She threw it at Robert's back, grabbing the doorknob. "I have no idea." As if there weren't enough bosses in town. Without turning around, Robert replied. Camille stepped out of her husband's office, and a dozen prying eyes stared at her. She walked briskly down the hallway without looking at anyone, and on her way out of the building she saw Kelly standing by the parking lot. She was being hugged and apparently comforted by some guy. Camille froze for a moment, and then shame came over her in a wave that burned her from the inside out. Tears held back, hers for so long, tore down the barrier and dripped from her eyes. Nothing. Clara counted the drops of valerian. Men, they are so dodgy. Cunning, but you don't need to cry over it. Appreciate your dignity. She handed Camille, who was shaking, a glass of water and a sedative. Clara came as soon as she heard her friend's unintelligible voice mixed with crying. "Clara, I've embarrassed him." The girl took the glass with a shaking hand. "And him and me. I'm anticipating a story on their website." The editor's crazy wife bursts into the office. "God, what a shame." Camille was in tears again. She hadn't been able to calm down for about an hour. "Well," Clara sighed, "at least you'll be remembered. And why would you go there in the first place?" "I'm such an idiot." Camille bumped into her friend's shoulder. "We're all a bit stupid." Clara gently put her palm on her head. "Why did you call me this afternoon?" Camille realized that she couldn't handle another confrontation today. "I just wanted to chat," she answered. "Maybe do some shopping." "Well, we're not going anywhere now. No amount of foundation can hide your puffy eyes. That's what I'm telling you as an expert." Clara made a finger to the ceiling, which made her friend smile a little. "What are you going to do about Robert? I don't believe in random texting." "I don't know. Maybe I'm just really paranoid." Camille slumped against the back of the couch and stared at the ceiling. "If that's the case, you should apologize. I'd do some more digging." Clara wouldn't let it go. It was reckless of him to sleep with his almost secretary. It's like a joke situation. There's someone else, that's for sure. "I'll talk to him if I can." Camille exhaled. For some reason, she dialed the number she had copied from her husband's cell phone. Once again, it responded with the monotonous muttering of an electronic robot. Robert came home late that evening, but Camille waited for him. Her husband looked at her glumly and without a word went to take a shower. "Robert, I'm sorry." Camille waited for him in the room. The man walked past her and shook his head. "I'll forgive you, but my reputation is ruined by your tantrum today. There will be whispers behind my back, and I gave Kelly the day off." "I was wrong." Camille stared sorrowfully at the floor. "I'm so embarrassed. I was so ashamed." Robert sat down on the other side of the sofa. "You've turned into some kind of paranoid neurotic, haven't you? Going through my things, sniffing my hair, then doing this because of some stupid mistake. Some strange woman. God damn it." "I just felt like our relationship was getting colder." Quietly, Camille muttered. "When it seems, my dear, it is customary to be baptized," said Robert. "Have you decided to play the jealous wife?" The idea failed, but Clara said, "The beginning was Camille. You and Clara should be in the yellow ward together with ideas like that." Her husband came at her again. "Who does she listen to?" "She can't see what's under her nose, but they give you advice." "She has a husband who walks left and right." Suddenly Robert stopped halfway through the sentence. It looked as if he had said something unnecessary, and now he was trying to figure out how to put it back. Camille's ears perked up. "Shorter." The man pressed the bridge of his nose with his fingers and covered his eyes. "Take a sedative, and don't talk nonsense to Clara. She's a bad influence on you." Robert stood up and left the room, signaling that the conversation was over. Camille was left sitting alone in the dark, confused and full of doubts. Robert knows something about William, but he doesn't say anything. Is it male solidarity or what? And why is he suddenly so against Clara? Tormented Camille did not pay attention to the real coldness of her husband and his frank unwillingness to solve the problem and forgive her. A week passed. Life went on as usual. The head doctor of the clinic informed Camille that she, along with 2 other young dentists, would go to a 3-day conference in another city. The girl was even a little happy about this turn of events. It could help her take her mind off her worries, although outwardly no one would have found in Camille's life reasons to do so. Her husband was friendly to her. Clara still called and chattered like a magpie about everything. The patients didn't diminish, but behind the outer mask of normality, there was the affable coldness of her husband, a girlfriend drowned in rhinestones, and a job that suddenly became exhausting and drained all her energy. Camille could never find the strength to talk to her friend about her husband. She had no proof on her hands except her own words. No enough suspicions, she would have to get her family in order first. Robert agreed that the trip would be good for his wife and even bought her a train ticket. You'll listen to smart uncles and aunts, you'll go for a walk and put all the nonsense out of your head. He admonished Camille as she packed her traveling bag. The train was tapping its wheels. The girl rarely rode trains, and every time she did it was a bit of a gimmick. Colleagues were arguing animatedly nearby. Robert may be right. I'm being paranoid. He and I have been together since we were 18, and there has never been any occasion. Thought Camille, looking out the window at the passing station, Christmas trees. How many people preyed on him at university? I didn't really care at the time. Well, almost. Yes, it's all about panicking yourself and others. Whether it was the monotonous chug-chug that chased away the bad thoughts or the atmosphere of the trip, Camille was in a pleasant mood. She put her head down on the iron and freshly laundered linen. I'll come back and we'll definitely go to my grandmother's house in the country. Camille decided and closed her eyes. Training in the company of the sea and the sun really did the girl good. In the morning, she and her colleagues listened to seminars of experienced doctors and presentations of new materials for work, and in the afternoon, they went to the beach to sunbathe and swim. The sea climate and fresh air seemed to erase her worries from her mind. Camille thought about how she would return home, how she would tell Robert about the trip. How then the two of them would go to the place where malachite was mined and a friend was writing his collection of stories. It's a pity I don't have Clark with me. The girl thought, watching the waves. She said she hadn't been to the sea for a couple of years. Camille wanted very much to share her peace with people close to her. After all, the colleagues were only colleagues. On the third day, the organizers said that the last speaker could not come due to illness. They apologized to the participants and informed them that the training was closed. Camille decided not to stay one more day in the hotel with the others, but bought a ticket on the same day and went home. I'm going to surprise Robert. I'll arrive early and with a tan. She smiled, looking out the window at the sea. The train arrived at its destination early in the morning. On the train, Camille had a nice chat with a neighbor and her grandson 9 years old. The grandmother treated the girl to fruit and enjoyed listening to her stories about her work, recalling her own youth. The morning city was just waking up, washed by the night rain. It wasn't as warm here as it was by the sea. It was even a little fresh. Outside the cab window, sleepy alleys and early joggers whizzed by. In the alleys, the first rays of sunlight dispersed the foggy remnants. They played in puddles and glimmered drops on bushes and tree branches. The cab driver helped her unload her bag, wished her a good day, and drove off to his new passengers. Camille thought about how she would go up to the apartment, go in quietly, and lie down in bed with a sleeping Robert. How nice that today was her husband's day off, and they would be able to sleep through lunch together, then make coffee and talk about the upcoming trip. Camille quietly turned the key in the lock so as not to wake Robert. Quietly, she entered the apartment and barely saw the familiar hallway, dazed. All the good mood she'd brought with her from the sea had collapsed and shattered into tiny pieces. Her heart was pounding like the wheels of the train she had come back here on. There were shoes lying in the hallway that she would recognize out of 100. They'd bought them together last year and picked up the last pair in town. The shoes belonged to Clara. At the mirror, Camille saw her keys and an equally achingly familiar car keychain. For a moment, a childish, naive thought crept into her head. Maybe something had happened, and Clara had come to ask for help. But the thought was immediately suffocated by the falling curtain of obviousness. From the bedroom, Camille heard soft voices. It seemed to her that her heart was pounding so that the neighbors could hear her. The girl crept quietly to the door and froze, listening to what was going on behind it. I almost talked him into totally buying me the parlor from Vanessa. A familiar female voice sounded. Will you get a divorce as soon as the official deal is done? The husband's voice answered him. On the same day, confirmed with a laugh the interlocutress. And when are you going to file the papers? I'm thinking of what to tell her. A sigh followed. The idea of a fake affair had failed. Failed because someone forgot their cell phone at home. A woman's voice interrupted. I've been working her as hard as I can. A little more, and she would have filed for divorce herself. We would have gotten away with it. And now you have to either talk head on or think of something else. It's a shame to go head on. Followed the answer after a short pause. I don't like her as a woman, but I pity her as a person. And the show is not pitiful. A female voice smirked. I choose the lesser of two zones. The male voice grinned. Camille clamped her hands over her mouth and felt the corners of her eyes grow wet. A wave of cold rushed up her back, her cheeks felt hot, and her throat felt like it was being squeezed in the grip of an invisible hand. The realization fell in pieces, and each one was worse than the last. It stung, eating away at everything good inside, like acid. Robert, You and I tried it back in college, but you were too right then, and I was too stupid. But if it had worked then, Clara's voice was quiet, but creeping. There might not have been those long years with the bore and the dentist. My husband might not be here, and things would be easier now, and we'd be living somewhere abroad by now. If everything works out, that's what will happen. Robert confirmed. We'll manage remotely, you the salon and me the agency. Camille felt the tears soaking her shirt and imprinting hot drops on her chest. We'll be gone, and maybe they'll get something with William. A chuckle came from behind the door. I could see him looking at her. Good for Camille. She likes dumplings and soup and watching soap operas at night. She's always been a little short of you. She loves her work and doesn't like herself very much, said Robert. We live like neighbors. I'm tired of the home girl who always has everything according to plan. I feel like an old man next to her. I want something else. I know what you want, Robert, she whispered. Further in the room there was a commotion. Camille sat against the wall outside the door, shaking with shame, pity, disgust, resentment, and betrayal of the two people she thought closest to her after her mother. The last bit of realization poured out. The cup had emptied. The cold hands of reality finally closed around her throat. She jumped up and flung herself out of the apartment in what she was wearing. The street morning, Camille ran and ran, away from the shame and embarrassment she had lived in for so many years. She was disgusted with her own existence. She wanted to forget herself, to erase her memory. She wanted to go back 10 years, to pull her hand out of Clara's fingers, to send the smug asshole in the dormitory. Each year that passed was like whipping her in the back with a rod, leaving deep wounds and setting up the pain to roll in harder and harder. Tears covered her eyes. Everything was cloudy, barely recognizable. She stopped, breathed, and ran again. Passers-by shouted at her, but Camille did not hear, did not see. She wanted to hide from this vile feeling from herself. Girl, look out! It was the last shred of reality that imprinted itself on her memory before pain and darkness overrode her. The peaceful sounds of Ply snapped Camille out of oblivion. She was still thinking irritably what that nasty beeping sound was, similar to the trills of an electronic alarm clock from the 90s. My eyes opened with difficulty. My body felt woozy. My right leg felt petrified and wouldn't move. My whole right side gave a painful tightening sensation when I tried to turn on the bed. My head was buzzing. Good morning. You're finally awake, Camille. A woman in a white coat greeted her. Camille looked around and only then realized that she was lying in a hospital bed. What happened to me? She looked at the leg in a cast that was sticking out from under the blanket. You were hit by a car. I'm surprised you got away with a broken leg, a mild concussion, and moderate contusions. The doctor replied, looking at the paperwork. They pick up other people in pieces in cases like this. You were born with your shirt on. Your family will be happy to know that you're on the mend. Not all of them. Camille turned her back to the wall. Is someone coming to see you? To call your relatives? The doctor asked. Tell my husband I've been hit by a car and I'm dead. I can't go back. I don't want to see him again, and I don't want to see her ever again. Pleadingly, Camille said without turning around. The doctor shook her head. If they come, don't let them in, Camille added. The hospital was dreary, but the walls with the Red Cross seemed to shield her from the painful thoughts of what had happened. The physical pain didn't bother her as much as her soul was tearing up. The mother rushed to the hospital half an hour after the call. She first cringed, then cursed, then cried at her daughter's bedside. Camille told her everything she had heard that morning. When Miranda left her daughter's room, she gave the nurses each a box of chocolates, and on pain of complaining to the head doctor, ordered that no one with names beginning with the letters R and C be allowed to see her daughter. Camille blocked the numbers of the husband and the lying friend. She asked her mother and a coworker friend to pick up her belongings from her husband's apartment when he was away. Doctors said rehabilitation would take about 3 weeks. The fracture would finally heal in 3 months. One day there was a knock on the door of the room. Camille thought it was one of the staff, although they usually didn't bother to knock. "Come in," she shouted, not looking away from the magazine her mother had brought. "Hello, Camille." There was a familiar voice. William stood in the doorway with a bouquet of flowers and a robe thrown over his shoulders. Camille had mixed feelings when she saw her ex-girlfriend's husband. On the one hand, he reminded her of what had happened, but on the other hand, he had nothing to do with it. "You have no idea how hard I worked to get here," the man complained, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "They're practically checking IDs to get in to see you." "That's my request." Camille nodded. "Why are you hiding from someone?" William joked. "Maybe I am," the girl confirmed. William stared at her in surprise. His eyes were filled with question and incomprehension. Camille exhaled and decided to tell. She recalled everything: Clara's partying at the Institute, her consumerist attitude toward men, and her hypocrisy under the mask of a friend. William listened with his mouth open. "I want you not to fall victim to their game like I did. Get a divorce soon and don't listen to any pleas. Don't you dare buy a salon. Clara is using you and has been using you." Camille finished. "Where did you—" The stunned William couldn't believe his ears. They talked about it for a long time. The girl asked the man not to tell anyone where she was or what was wrong with her, and not to do anything stupid that would ruin his life. At the end, when William was leaving, he asked, "Camille, tell me, do I have a chance?" "Not at the moment." She shook her head. "I want to be alone. Maybe in the future, maybe. I understand, correct me soon. I'll come by, if you don't mind." Nodded William. "Come over." She blinked, showing agreement. Time passes differently in the village than in the city. It is measured and quiet. Hustle and hurry are alien to those who are accustomed to get up to the trill of the rooster. A light frost touched the rowan berries, which shone against the snow with bright lights. The snow itself sparkled in the sunlight, still fresh, not crushed by anyone's feet and paws. "Granddaughter, there's a letter for you." Kathy grunted, entering the hay and waving the envelopes. "Thank you." Camille shouted from the kitchen. She was preparing a simple breakfast for herself and her grandmother. "It's been a long time since I've seen a letter." Sitting down on a stool, Kathy exclaimed, "You young people are all calling now. Is there a letter from some fiancé?" She handed Camille an envelope. She took a quick glance at the sender's name and decided to read it later. After her recovery, Camille immediately went to her grandmother's house in the country. She could not stay in the city, where every street reminded her of the experience, betrayal, and shame. The girl quit her job, took care of other minor matters, made her mother her representative in the divorce proceedings so she wouldn't have to deal with Robert anymore. "Out of sight, out of mind," said her mother as she saw her off. "You can go as you like and come back as you like. Just call me often." It was quiet in the village, where the pain began to subside and gradually recede. Time was doing its work, healing the wounded soul. Mother did not talk about Robert and the divorce, only promised to tell me when it was completely over. The envelope had an address and William's name on it. How did he know where to find her? It remained a mystery. Camille ran her eyes over the lines. William had written about the divorce, about leaving Clara with almost nothing. She deliberately skipped that part of the letter. Dear Camille, I realize that I'm probably an unnecessary person in your life, but since that evening in the cafe, you haven't left my mind. I've made a lot of mistakes and missed a lot of chances, but I don't want to let you go. The girl stopped, listening to herself. Something faintly trembled in her after these words. I'm willing to wait as long as you say. I hope for an answer. William. Camille folded the letter, tucked it into the envelope, and began to twirl it in her hands. If she had doubted it at the hospital, now she knew for sure. Kathy came into the room. What do you think I should write back? Asked the old woman, looking at the concentrated face of her granddaughter. I think that old fans are not invited into the new life. Camille smiled at her grandmother, tearing open the envelope. She tossed the scraps into the trash can and looked out the window. Grandma, the neighbor's here, probably to ask about the cow again. She's so restless. She'll cure the animal. The old woman shook her hands and trampled in the hay.